Welcome back to Terrified Tales, where the rain falls slow and the fear creeps in quicker. Like and subscribe before we begin, and tell us where and when you're listening. Midnight, alone, that's when they find you. The bus jolted to a stop, throwing Elias Rook against the weathered leather of his seat. He hadn't been back to Hollowfield in over a decade, not since the day Jonah had died. A day that had twisted his memories into something dark, something he couldn't bear to face. Yet here he was, stepping off the bus, the same cold air of the town pressing in on him like an old familiar wound. Hollowfield, or what remained of it, stood before him like a half-dreamed thing, disjointed and in decay as though it had been forgotten by time itself. The buildings, once vibrant with color, had faded to shades of gray, their wooden frames warped from years of neglect. The streets, cracked and uneven, stretched in twisted veins across the land, leading nowhere in particular. The wind whispered through the dry leaves, a low, constant murmur, like a voice trying to say something important, something forgotten. Or perhaps it was just Elias's mind, searching for meaning where there was none. He pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders and inhaled deeply. The smell of pine and damp earth filled his lungs, a scent that had once been comforting, but now only reminded him of the hollow ache in his chest. Hollowfield had never been kind to him after Jonah's death. The town had buried its secrets beneath layers of history, and Elias had buried his grief in the same way. But today, it was impossible to ignore. Today, he was here for answers. Elias stood at the bus stop for a moment, letting the cool air bite at his skin. His thoughts were heavy, swirling around the same question that had plagued him for years. What had really happened to Jonah? He glanced toward the horizon, where the dense woods of the nearby forest loomed. It had all started there, in those caves beneath the earth. As he made his way to the small, crumbling town center, Elias's mind flickered back to the last time he had seen his brother. Jonah had been laughing, carefree, chasing after some story he'd read in one of those old town legends about the pact that Hollowfield's founders had made with something beneath the earth. A strange myth Elias had brushed off, thinking it nothing more than the imagination of a boy with too much time on his hands. But Jonah had gone into those caves. Jonah had never come back. The town was quieter than he remembered, the usual bustle of activity missing. It was as if the years had eroded the life from Hollowfield, leaving only a few scattered figures to walk its streets, their faces masked in distant, emotionless gazes. Elias's footsteps echoed on the cracked pavement as he approached the dilapidated town hall, where he had once spent afternoons in the company of his brother, playing games they would never finish. Before he could step inside, a figure emerged from the shadowed doorway. A tall woman with dark hair pulled back into a braid and eyes that gleamed with a sharp, calculating look. She was wearing a long coat, but beneath it, Elias noticed the outline of a camera slung over her shoulder. Mira Langston, she introduced herself, her voice low and confident. "I know who you are, Elias Rook." Elias blinked, surprised. He hadn't expected anyone to know his name, much less be waiting for him. He frowned, studying her. "I heard you were coming back to Hollowfield," Mira continued, as though she had read his mind. "I've been researching. There's more to this place than you remember." Her gaze darkened for a moment, her expression shifting as she looked past him toward the edge of the woods. "More?" Elias echoed, his curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" "The town has a history, a complicated history, but I think you already know that, don't you?" Elias hesitated. "I'm here to find out what really happened to Jonah," he said, his voice tinged with the old pain that had never quite healed. Mira's gaze softened, but only for a moment. "Then we're looking for the same thing." She turned and began walking toward the town center, her footsteps deliberate. "Come with me," I'll show you something. Elias felt a sudden, inexplicable pull. His gut told him to follow her, that there was something important she was not yet saying. He had no other choice but to follow. They walked through the center of Hollowfield, where the buildings leaned in on one another like old friends, reminiscing about a time long past. Mira led him to the edge of the town, to a small, run-down bookstore that appeared to have been abandoned for years. She pushed open the door with a soft creak, and Elias followed her inside. The smell of dust and old paper hit him instantly, a familiar scent that both soothed and unsettled him. Inside, the store was dim, with shelves stacked high with books that appeared to have been untouched for decades. The walls were adorned with faded photographs of the town's early days, and at the far end of the store, Elias noticed a large map pinned to the wall. It was old, so old that some of the ink had begun to fade, but it marked something that caught his attention immediately: a large, jagged area labeled the Hollow. "This is where it all started," Mira said quietly, standing beside him. "The land beneath Hollowfield, the burial grounds, the caves, the pact. It's all connected, and it's all tied to your family." Elias stiffened. "My family," he repeated, unsure if he had heard her correctly. Mira nodded, her eyes meeting his. "The Rook family, Elias. Your ancestors were the ones who made the original deal with the deity, and I believe you're the one who will have to face it." Elias's pulse quickened, the weight of her words pressing on him. He stepped closer to the map, studying it carefully. It showed the town of Hollowfield, but the lines and shapes beneath it were unrecognizable. There were no roads leading to the caves, no markings for the burial grounds. "What is this place?" he asked, his voice low with disbelief. "This," Mira said, "is where the truth lies. The hollow beneath Hollowfield. And I think you're about to find out just how deep it really goes." The door creaked open behind them, and Elias turned to see a familiar face step inside. Liam Ferris, his old friend. The one person he'd hoped wouldn't find him here. "I knew I'd find you in the middle of this," Liam said, his tone a mix of annoyance and concern. "What the hell are you getting yourself into, Elias?" Elias met his gaze, trying to push down the rising sense of dread. "I'm trying to find out what happened to Jonah." Liam's expression darkened. "I thought we left that behind years ago. You can't change what happened." "I don't think it's that simple," Elias murmured, his thoughts racing. "Not this time." Liam glanced at Mira, then back to Elias. He didn't say anything at first, but there was a look in his eyes, something between skepticism and fear. "You're not just digging up old memories, are you?" Liam asked quietly. "This place, Hollowfield, it's cursed, Elias. We both know that." Elias didn't answer. Instead, he turned back to the map, as if the answers were there, waiting for him to find them. But in the silence of the store, beneath the weight of his past, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that whatever lay ahead, it would change everything, and he wasn't sure he was ready. Elias sat at the edge of the dusty table inside the old bookstore, the musty air of the room thick with the scent of paper and ink. Mira Langston stood before him, her fingers brushing through a pile of old town records, her expression serious, as she flipped through pages stained with age. Liam stood near the door, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his eyes fixed on Elias. "I know you don't believe me," Mira said, not looking up from the records. "But Hollowfield has a history. That's older than the town itself, and the Rooks. Your family, Elias. You're part of that history." Elias was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. He had always known that there was something strange about Hollowfield, something deeply embedded in its bones. But hearing Mira speak of his family's involvement, of something deeper than simple town gossip, made him uneasy. "What do you mean, part of the history?" Elias finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mira lifted her head, meeting his gaze with those piercing eyes. I mean that your ancestors were more than just settlers, Elias. They made a deal, a pact, and your family's bloodline has carried the weight of it ever since. Liam shook his head, disbelief etched on his face. This is ridiculous. A pact, a legend, sure, but not a... You don't understand, Mira interrupted, her voice low but firm. The pact was real. The land beneath Hollowfield was always special. It was never just soil or stone. It was alive. Your family's ties to this place go back generations, Elias. The deal your ancestors made with the entity that inhabited the land ensured the survival of this town. It was a trade. Life for life. Prosperity for sacrifice. Elias felt a shiver run down his spine. His thoughts churned, images of Jonah flashing in his mind. What kind of sacrifice? He asked, his voice catching in his throat. Mira's lips pressed into a thin line as though she wasn't sure whether to speak the words aloud. Every few decades, the town must give up someone. A life, freely given, in order to keep the curse at bay, to keep Hollowfield alive. It's been that way for centuries. The air in the room seemed to grow thicker, as though the very walls were leaning in, pressing down on him with the weight of something ancient. Elias struggled to swallow, the sensation of drowning in the past overtaking him. And Jonah? Elias asked the question more of a plea than anything else. What about him? Was he the sacrifice? Was his death part of this? Mira paused for a long moment before answering. Jonah. His death was a result of the pact. But not just any death. The town had been overdue for a sacrifice. The land... She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. The land called for him. Elias felt as though the ground beneath him was vanishing. The air was suffocating, his lungs struggling to fill with the clarity he so desperately needed. His mind raced, but nothing made sense. Hollowfield, Jonah's death. Everything was now connected to something far darker than he had ever imagined. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Jonah was never an accident. Liam broke the silence, his voice cutting through Elias's spiraling thoughts. What are you trying to say, Mira? Are you suggesting this town, this curse is something supernatural, something that controls who lives and dies? Mira's gaze softened, but there was no humor in it. Yes, Liam, that's exactly what I'm saying, and Elias's family is at the very heart of it. Elias's stomach twisted. You're telling me that my family, my ancestors, they made this pact? They knew what would happen to Jonah? They knew that one day it would be our blood again? Mira nodded slowly. Yes. That's why the Rooks are always connected to Hollowfield. You've always been the keeper of the curse's balance. But no one ever told you, did they? No one ever told you what that really meant. The weight of her words settled in Elias's chest like a stone. He looked around the room, at the shelves stacked high with books that couldn't possibly contain all the history buried beneath Hollowfield. The legend, the pact, his family's role in it. It felt like something too impossible to grasp. Yet there was a gnawing sense deep inside him, one that told him that everything he had ever known was a lie. I didn't come here to learn about legends, Elias said quietly, standing up. His voice trembled, but his resolve was firm. I came here to find out what happened to Jonah. Mira's gaze softened with sympathy, but there was a sadness in her eyes that made Elias uncomfortable. You're already deep in it, Elias. Jonah's death wasn't just some random tragedy. It's part of a cycle, and now you've returned. Whether you want to or not, you're part of that cycle too. Elias felt his pulse quicken, the room closing in around him. The suffocating weight of guilt and grief churned in his gut. The very air seemed to thicken with the secrets Hollowfield had buried for so long. And now, Elias was digging into them, unearthed pieces of a puzzle that threatened to swallow him whole. "Why now?" Elias asked. "Why is this all coming to light? Now, after all these years?" Mira leaned in slightly, her voice soft but carrying the weight of an unsettling truth. "Because the curse is waking up again. The land is stirring. It's calling for something, and I think it's calling for you." Liam stepped forward, his brow furrowed with concern. "Elias, you've got to be careful. All of this, it's not some fairy tale. If what Mira's saying is true, it's dangerous." Elias turned away, feeling a cold sweat on his brow. He couldn't focus on Liam, couldn't focus on anything except the gnawing thought that had taken root in his mind. The land is calling for you. The weight of that phrase dug into his chest like a spear, and he could feel the pull of Hollowfield, its past, its secrets, its suffocating grip, drawing him in. "I have to go back," Elias said suddenly, his voice raw with determination. "I need to see the caves. I need to see where it happened, where Jonah died." Mira hesitated, looking at him with caution. "You don't understand," she warned softly. "The caves are not just caves. They're a doorway. The past lives there, and it's not something you can walk away from once you step inside." But Elias didn't care. He had already made up his mind. Jonah had died in those caves. And if he was ever going to understand the truth, he had to return to where it all began. The journey back to the caves was silent, each of them lost in their own thoughts. As Elias walked through the forest that bordered Hollowfield, the trees seemed to grow more oppressive, their shadows longer and darker. He couldn't shake the feeling that the land itself was alive, watching, waiting for him to make his next move. Every step he took was like a step closer to something he couldn't escape, something older and more powerful than he had ever imagined. And when they reached the edge of the caves, the air was different, thicker, heavy, almost suffocating. It was as if the past itself was closing in on them. "I'll go in alone," Elias said, his voice barely audible. Mira glanced at him but said nothing. Liam, on the other hand, shook his head, stepping closer. "You're not doing this alone, Elias. Not after everything we've learned." Elias hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. He wasn't ready to face the truth alone, but the weight of the land's secrets pressed down on him. There was no turning back now. The wind howled through the trees as Elias, Mira, and Liam made their way through the dense forest, their footsteps muted by the thick carpet of fallen leaves. The air felt heavier now, as if the very earth beneath their feet was pulling them toward something dark, something buried deep within Hollowfield's forgotten past. The journey to Maureen Rook's home felt strangely ritualistic, like they were walking into a realm untouched by time. Elias's heart thudded in his chest, each beat reminding him of the years he had spent running from this place, from the pain that lay buried in the shadows of his memories. As they reached the clearing, Maureen's house appeared through the veil of trees, a weathered cottage, isolated and distant, far from the town's crumbling center. Its stone walls were cloaked in moss, and the roof sagged under the weight of age, as if the house itself had grown tired of standing. A single chimney puffed a thin wisp of smoke into the grey sky, giving the house the appearance of something that had not yet given in to the passage of time. Maureen Rook, Elias's estranged aunt, had lived here for as long as Elias could remember. She was a figure of strange mystery in his childhood, an ever-looming presence, always distant and cryptic, and yet somehow comforting. After Jonah's death, she had withdrawn further into herself, leaving Elias and his family to deal with the grief alone. Now, as Elias stepped toward her home, he was filled with a mix of dread and anticipation. She was the key to understanding what had really happened to Jonah, to the curse that had followed them all this time. The front door creaked open before they could knock. Maureen stood there, a tall, gaunt woman, her face etched with lines that spoke of a lifetime of secrets. Her eyes, sharp as daggers, scanned Elias with a look that held both recognition and wariness. "Come in, Elias," she said softly, stepping aside to let them pass. Her voice was the same as he remembered, low, smooth, yet carrying an undertone of something ancient, something both wise and sorrowful. Elias entered the house, the air inside thick with the scent of herbs and old books. The faint flicker of candlelight cast long shadows against the stone walls, and the low crackling of a fire was the only sound that filled the silence. Everything was as it had always been, dark, quiet, and full of the weight of memories that no one dared to speak. Maureen gestured for them to sit, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she had all the time in the world. The three of them settled into the worn armchairs around the fire, but no one spoke. The tension in the room was palpable, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for the past to be uncovered. "I didn't expect to see you here, Elias," Maureen finally said, her voice betraying a hint of the same sadness that had plagued their family for years. "I thought you had forgotten about Hollowfield." Elias shook his head, his throat tight. "I came to find out what happened to Jonah. I need to know the truth." Maureen's eyes flickered, but she said nothing at first. She simply stared at the fire, the flames casting dancing shadows across her face. For a moment, Elias thought she might remain silent forever. But then, as though the weight of his question had finally broken her resolve, she spoke. "Jonah's death was never an accident," she said softly. "It was a part of the curse. The same curse that has been tied to this land for generations." Elias felt a chill run through him. He had suspected it, hoped for it in a way, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. The past, the secrets, the things he had buried so deep. They were all coming to light now. He couldn't escape it. Not anymore. "What do you mean, Maureen?" Elias asked, his voice strained. "How is Jonah's death part of the curse? What curse?" Maureen looked at him, her gaze heavy with the weight of years, spent carrying the truth alone. "It's not just a curse," she murmured. "It's a pact. Your ancestors made a deal with an entity, something that lived beneath Hollowfield, something older than the town itself. And the price for that prosperity, our prosperity, was always blood. A life must be taken every few decades to keep the balance, to keep the land alive." Elias's mind reeled, the images of the caves and the haunting whispers of his brother flooding back. It was all true. The stories, the dreams, the dread that had lived in him for so long. He had always thought there was some explanation, some way to prove Jonah's death wasn't connected to this town, to its cursed history. But now, it seemed like there was no escaping the truth. Jonah was the sacrifice, Elias said flatly, as if hearing the words in the air would make it easier to accept. Maureen's eyes clouded with grief. Yes, Jonah's death was inevitable. It was meant to happen, Elias. Not just because of the land, but because of who we are. The Rook family. We've been bound to Hollowfield for centuries, tied to this place in ways that no one could ever escape. Your father knew, and I knew too, but we all turned away from it. I couldn't stop it. The words hit Elias like a blow to the chest. Your father knew. His mind flashed back to his father, distant, always hiding something behind his eyes, always keeping secrets. He had never understood the distance between them, the silence. Now it made sense in a way that Elias hadn't been ready for. "So, what do we do now?" Elias asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and desperation. "If this is really a curse, how do we stop it? How do we end it?" Maureen's expression hardened, as if she had been expecting this question for years. "You can't end it, Elias. not without consequences. The pact has been in place for too long. It's not something that can just be broken. You'd have to make a choice, a sacrifice. Elias's heart clenched. A sacrifice? His voice wavered. What kind of sacrifice? Maureen looked at him, her eyes filled with regret. The kind of sacrifice that demands everything from you. The kind that takes more than just your life. You would have to give up something far more precious, your memories, your connection to Jonah, to everything you've ever loved. And even then, the curse would not be fully lifted. It would only be quieted for a time. Elias sat back in his chair, his thoughts spinning. He couldn't imagine living without Jonah's memory. That was the only thing that had kept him going after everything. The connection to his brother, the one thing that made the pain bearable. But what other choice did he have? I don't understand, Elias said, his voice barely a whisper. If I make this sacrifice, if I give up my memories, what happens to me? What happens to Hollowfield? Maureen met his gaze. You'd be free, Elias. Free of the curse. But Hollowfield would continue. The land would still be tied to the pact. But it would be a quiet, unspoken thing. It would rest, waiting until the next rook is born, until the next cycle begins. Elias felt as though the world had shifted beneath him, as though the ground itself was moving, pulling him into a darkness that he didn't know how to escape. He had come here looking for answers, but now all he had was more uncertainty, more questions. You should leave, Elias, Maureen said quietly, before the land calls for you, before it takes what it wants from you. Elias stood up abruptly, his chair scraping harshly against the stone floor. I can't leave, he said, the resolve in his voice surprising even him. I need to know everything. I need to understand this. I need to know why Jonah had to die. And I need to know if there's any way to break this curse. Maureen said nothing. She just watched him, her gaze steady, knowing that there were no simple answers. As Elias turned toward the door, he knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. Hollowfield's secrets had been buried for far too long, and now they were waking. And with them, something far worse than he could imagine. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, as Elias, Mira, and Liam made their way through the dense forest that surrounded the caves. The trees pressed in on them, their twisted limbs stretching overhead like the gnarled fingers of ancient, unseen creatures. The deeper they walked, the more the feeling of unease settled over them, like an oppressive weight pressing down from all sides. It was as if the very forest itself was alive, aware of their presence, and intent on keeping them away. Elias's thoughts raced, his mind still reeling from Maureen's revelation. His family's involvement with the curse, the truth about Jonah's death, it was all too much to process. The weight of the past hung heavily on his shoulders, threatening to crush him, and yet something in him refused to turn back. He had come this far, and there was no going back now. If he wanted to understand what had happened to his brother, if he wanted to make sense of the nightmare that had haunted him for so long, he had to go to the caves, the place where it all began. Elias shivered at the thought. The caves were not just a natural formation, they were something far darker. They were the heart of Hollowfield's curse, the source of its power, and the site of countless sacrifices over the years. And now they called to him, beckoning him to uncover their secrets. As they reached the entrance to the caves, Elias's breath caught in his throat. The opening was narrow, barely large enough for them to squeeze through, and the jagged stone around it seemed to shimmer with an eerie, unnatural light. It was as though the cave itself was alive, pulsing with an energy that felt both ancient and malevolent. The wind howled through the opening, carrying with it a strange, whispering sound, as though the earth itself was trying to speak. This is it, Mira said quietly. her voice barely audible over the wind. "This is where the pact was made, where your family sealed their fate." Elias swallowed hard, his throat dry. "And where Jonah?" His voice trailed off, the words choking in his chest. Mira nodded gravely. "Yes, the caves are where the ritual took place. The land, it demands a blood sacrifice. And Jonah's death was no accident." Liam looked uneasy, shifting from foot to foot as though he could feel the weight of the cave's dark presence bearing down on him. "I don't know about this," he muttered, glancing nervously at the narrow passage. "It doesn't feel right. Something's wrong." Elias met his friend's gaze, his own anxiety mirrored in Liam's eyes. "I know. But we don't have a choice. We have to go in. I have to see it for myself." Reluctantly, Liam nodded. "All right, but if things start going south, we turn around. Understand?" Elias didn't respond, but his resolve was unshakable. He had to face this. The truth was buried in these caves, and if he wanted to understand what had happened to Jonah, what had happened to himself, he had to go in. The darkness, the whispers, the cold touch of the past, they were all waiting for him. They stepped into the cave one by one, the air growing colder as they descended deeper into the earth. The walls were slick with moisture, and the uneven ground beneath their feet threatened to trip them at every turn. Elias could hear the sound of his breath echoing through the narrow passage, each inhale and exhale amplifying the oppressive silence that surrounded them. The deeper they went, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. The walls seemed to close in around them, and the faint whispers Elias had heard outside grew louder, more distinct. It was as though the cave itself was speaking to him, its voice low and urgent, urging him forward. Elias's mind raced. The darkness of the caves was more than just the absence of light. It felt like a physical presence, something watching, something waiting. His heart pounded in his chest, and he found himself fighting the urge to turn around, to run back into the safety of the outside world. But he couldn't. Not now. Not when he was so close. They reached a narrow opening in the cave, a vast, open chamber stretching out before them. The air here was thick with the stench of decay, and the walls seemed to pulse with an energy that made Elias's skin crawl. In the center of the chamber was a large stone altar, covered in ancient symbols that seemed to writhe and shift in the flickering light of their torches. Elias's breath caught in his throat as he approached the altar, his mind racing with the knowledge of what had happened here. This was where it had all begun, the pact, the ritual, the deaths. This was where his family had sealed their fate. As Elias reached the altar, something strange happened. The whispers, which had been distant before, now seemed to come from all around him, swirling in the air like 1,000 voices speaking in unison. The walls of the cave seemed to tremble, as though the very earth was reacting to his presence. He reached out a trembling hand to touch the altar, but before his fingers could make contact, a sharp, dissonant sound rang out from the depths of the cave. It was a sound that made Elias's blood run cold, like 1,000 nails scraping against stone, a chorus of voices raised in agony. "Do you feel that?" Mira whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound. Elias nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "What is it?" he whispered, his voice thick with fear. Mira's eyes were wide with fear as she looked around the chamber. "It's the land, the entity that inhabits it. It's reacting to us being here. It's aware of us." Liam's voice cracked with panic. "We need to leave, now." But it was too late. The ground beneath their feet rumbled, and a tremor ran through the cave, causing the walls to shake violently. Elias staggered backward, his heart racing as the whispers grew louder, more frantic. The cave was alive, and it was angry. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the shadows, a shape, towering and indistinct, emerging from the depths of the cave. Elias's breath caught in his throat as the figure stepped forward, its form shifting in and out of focus. It was like looking at a mirage, a ghost, something between this world and the next. "Jonah," Elias whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief. But the figure did not respond. Instead, it raised a hand, and a cold wind swept through the cave, extinguishing their torches in an instant. The world plunged into darkness. Elias's pulse hammered in his ears as he felt something cold, something ancient, press against him. The whispers swelled to a deafening crescendo, and the temperature dropped, the very air growing thick with the presence of something far older and more powerful than anything Elias had ever imagined. "Run!" Mira shouted, her voice breaking through the chaos. But Elias couldn't move. His feet felt like they were rooted to the ground, and his mind was consumed by the figure before him. Jonah, or something that looked like him. The echoes of the past crashed down on him like a tidal wave, drowning him in memories of the day Jonah had disappeared, the day the caves had taken him. "Jonah!" Elias screamed, reaching out toward the figure, but as he did, the world around him seemed to distort, the cave shifting and warping, as though reality itself was unraveling. And then, in an instant, everything went silent. The darkness was complete. Elias's heart hammered in his chest, the silence deafening as he stood frozen in the heart of the cave. The figure of Jonah, or what he had believed to be Jonah, had vanished, swallowed by the same dark void that had taken their torches. Every part of Elias's body screamed to flee, to turn back and escape the suffocating grip of Hollowfield's secrets, but his legs refused to obey. His mind was reeling, caught in the horror of what he had just witnessed. Jonah's face, that unmistakable outline, had been so real, so alive in the flickering shadows. But what had it meant? Was it a hallucination, a trick of the light, or something far darker? The whispers had faded, but the sensation of being watched had not. Elias could still feel the cold presence pressing in on him, as though something ancient, something primordial, was closing in from all sides. The air felt thick and oppressive, the weight of the earth itself seeming to press against his chest. Where did it go? Mira's voice broke the silence, her tone shaky but determined. "What was that?" "I don't know," Elias replied, his voice tight. His gaze flicked to Liam, whose face was pale, eyes wide with fear. I thought I saw Jonah." "Jonah?" Liam echoed, his voice disbelieving. "Elias, that wasn't Jonah. It couldn't have been. That was something else." Elias opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. Something else. He wasn't so sure anymore. What if it had been Jonah, or a part of him? What if the curse had somehow kept his brother tied to this place, to the land that had claimed him? The more he thought about it, the more it made sense in a way he didn't want to acknowledge. Mira stepped closer, her face tense. The entity that lives here, it's not just a physical force. It's connected to the land itself, to the pact your family made. It controls the land's power, and it has a hold on everything here, including Jonah's death. It's not just the land that's cursed, it's us, Elias. The weight of her words pressed on him, and for a moment Elias could hardly breathe. The idea that his brother's death, his very existence, was tied to this place, to the curse, felt impossible. But everything in Hollowfield had been twisted by lies, by ancient forces, by the choices his ancestors had made. What if this curse was not just bound to the land, but to the blood that ran through his family? He forced the thoughts away, needing to focus. We need to keep moving. We can't just stand here, Elias muttered, his voice cold with resolve. If Jonah, If that thing is connected to this place, we need to find out what it wants. We need to know what happened to him. To all of us. Liam didn't respond immediately, but Elias could see the struggle in his eyes. The same battle between disbelief and fear that had consumed him when he first returned to Hollowfield. He wasn't wrong to feel terrified. This place was alive, in ways they couldn't understand, but Elias couldn't let it consume him. Not now. The trio moved deeper into the cave, their steps cautious but determined. As they descended further, the temperature seemed to drop, the chill seeping into their bones. It was as if they were walking deeper into the belly of the earth itself. The further they went, the more it felt like they were being swallowed whole. The walls of the cave closed in tighter, the jagged rock formations looming like skeletal remains, as though they were walking through the ribs of some long-dead creature. The passage eventually opened up into another chamber, one far larger than the previous. The floor was uneven, covered with an odd mixture of dirt and what looked like old cracked stone. But what immediately caught Elias's eye was the series of markings etched into the walls. Ancient symbols, some resembling the ones they had seen earlier near the altar, but others were unfamiliar, twisting, knot-like patterns that seemed to shimmer in the dim light of their torches. These aren't the same, Mira whispered, stepping forward, her fingers hovering over the markings. This isn't just a ritual site. This is something else, something older, something that predates the pact. Elias stepped closer, his heart racing as he examined the symbols. There was something deeply unsettling about them, something that tugged at the edges of his memory, something he couldn't quite grasp. It was as though the symbols were calling to him, urging him to understand their meaning. "I don't understand," Elias muttered, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "What does this mean?" Mira's eyes narrowed, and she stepped back. "These symbols they're part of a much older tradition, Elias. They're not just connected to the pact. They're a part of the entity's original ritual, the original deal. These markings they're meant to bind souls, to trap them here, to keep them from moving on." Elias's blood ran cold. "Trap them here?" Mira nodded gravely. "Yes. The pact your family made wasn't just to keep Hollowfield safe. It was to keep the land's power alive, to ensure that the entity remained bound to this place, tied to your bloodline. And that power requires a constant exchange. A life. A soul." The realization hit Elias like a punch to the gut. A soul. Jonah's death, his brother's soul, had been part of the transaction. Hollowfield had taken more than just his life. It had taken his essence, trapping him in the earth beneath this cursed land. Liam took a step back, his voice shaking with disbelief. "You're telling me Jonah's soul is stuck here, forever?" Mira's face was grim. "Yes, and it's not just Jonah. Every death, every sacrifice traps a piece of that person's soul in the land. The entity feeds on it, using it to grow stronger. And when it's time for the next sacrifice, it calls on the souls that are already here, waiting." Jonah's death was part of that cycle. Elias staggered back, his mind racing. He had been so consumed by the desire for answers, for some way to break the curse, that he had never fully understood the cost of what his family had done. His brother's soul was locked in this place, trapped by the very land that had claimed him. "How do we get it back?" Elias demanded, his voice rising with desperation. "How do we release him?" Mira hesitated. "You can't. Not without unraveling the pact itself. And doing that would mean breaking the balance of Hollowfield, destroying the entity that sustains the land, and the consequences of that would be far worse than anything you can imagine." Elias's heart sank. "So Jonah is lost. There's nothing we can do." Mira met his gaze, her eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored his own. Not exactly. There is one way to release Jonah's soul, but it comes at an unimaginable cost. Elias's breath caught in his throat. What cost? Mira took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper. Your soul, Elias. Your soul would have to take his place. You would have to become part of the land, a sacrifice to free him. For a long moment, Elias couldn't speak. His mind reeled, trying to process what Mira had just said. His brother's soul, his own soul. The land demanded a price, and that price was always blood. He knew, deep down, that Hollowfield had never been a place of refuge. It had been a prison, a trap for all who had come before him. And now it was trying to claim him too. He had come here to save Jonah. But in the end, it seemed that only one could be saved. The silence that followed Mira's revelation hung heavy in the cave, the oppressive air pressing down on Elias with a suffocating force. His mind raced, but it felt like his thoughts were slipping through his fingers like sand. The weight of what Mira had said, the cost, the consequences, the horror of what the pact truly demanded, was too much to bear. His brother's soul was trapped here, beneath the cursed earth of Hollowfield, and the only way to release him, to save him, was to offer his own soul in exchange. Elias stood motionless, his chest tightening with each shallow breath. He thought he had come here for answers. He thought he had come to understand the truth about Jonah's death. But the truth was far worse than anything he could have imagined. He wasn't just facing a family curse. He was facing the loss of his own soul. What are you going to do, Elias? Liam's voice broke through the fog of Elias's thoughts, his tone weary, desperate. You can't. I have to, Elias muttered, his voice hollow. I have to free him. Liam's hand shot out, grabbing Elias's arm and pulling him back. No, you don't understand. You can't just give your soul away. This isn't some simple sacrifice. It's forever. The land will never let you go. Elias turned to face his friend, his eyes filled with a mix of desperation and determination. What choice do I have, Liam? Jonah is there, his soul, trapped, and I couldn't save him before. I couldn't save him when he needed me. This is the only chance I have left. Mira stepped forward, her expression grave. It's not just about saving Jonah. It's about what you're willing to give up, Elias. You'll lose everything, your memories, your past. The land will claim all of you piece by piece. Once you're part of it, there's no going back. Elias swallowed hard. I know, but I don't care anymore. I have to do this. For Jonah. For us. Mira looked at him for a long moment, her face softened with a touch of sympathy. Then we need to make sure the ritual is done right. Because if we fail, it won't just be your soul that's lost. Liam glanced at Mira, confusion in his eyes. What do you mean? What are we supposed to do? How do we stop the curse? Mira paused as though considering her words carefully. To break the pact, to truly undo what your ancestors did, we need to find the heart of it, the source of the entity's power. And that power, Elias, it's tied to the land itself. The altar, the caves, the bloodline, it's all part of the ritual. Elias nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. The altar, the sacrifice, the land. It had all been so simple in theory, so clear-cut. But now, everything was entangled, like a web that stretched through time and space, pulling at him, at his family, at his very soul. We need to go back to the altar, Elias said, his voice low, firm. That's where it all began. That's where the pact was made. That's where we can end it. Mira looked at him with a mixture of apprehension and agreement. The altar is where the ritual was completed, but it's also where the entity draws its strength. We'll have to be careful, Elias. The closer we get, the more dangerous it becomes. Liam shook his head, fear etched into his features. This is insane. We're talking about bargaining with a goddamn curse. How do we even know we can break it? What if we just make things worse? I don't have a choice, Liam, Elias replied, his voice cold, steady. Jonah is trapped here, and this is the only way to free him. Without another word, the three of them began to retrace their steps back through the cave, each of them moving with a purpose, driven by the realization that whatever happened next, it would be a turning point. The path was clear, even if it led them toward something darker than they could understand. The cave seemed to grow more oppressive with every step. The walls felt like they were closing in, the air thick with an energy that made Elias's skin crawl. The whispers had returned, but now they were louder, more urgent, as if the land itself was aware of their presence, aware of their intentions. Elias could feel the pull of the altar, the weight of the ancient ritual that had been set in motion long before he was born. The air felt charged, crackling with an energy that had been dormant for too long. When they arrived at the altar, the cave seemed to pulse with an eerie light. The symbols etched into the stone began to glow faintly, casting shadows that danced across the walls. Elias's stomach churned as he approached, the realization that he was standing in the very place where his family's blood had been spilled, where his brother's life had been taken to sustain the land, the pact, and everything that had come after. Mira took a step forward, placing her hand on the altar. We need to perform the ritual correctly. If we do it wrong, everything will collapse. The entity will be freed, and Hollowfield will sink into ruin. Elias's heart beat faster as he watched her, his mind racing. This was it, the point of no return. Once the ritual began, there would be no going back. Jonah's soul, his own soul, the curse, all of it would be tied together in a final act of sacrifice. Do you know what you're asking, Elias? Mira's voice was quiet, yet intense. The ritual is meant to trap a soul, not to release it. The entity's power is bound to the land. It's a part of the earth itself. It's been here for centuries, feeding off the sacrifices made by your family and by every generation since. I don't care, Elias replied, his voice fierce. I'm ready. I'll do whatever it takes to stop this, for Jonah. Mira nodded solemnly, and together they began to prepare the altar, placing symbols and offerings that were part of the ancient ritual. As they worked, Elias could feel the air growing heavier, the whispers more pronounced. The cave itself seemed to come alive with anticipation. Once everything was set, Elias stepped forward, standing before the altar, his heart racing. He could feel the presence of the entity in the air, a cold, oppressive weight that seemed to press against him, pulling him toward the center of the ritual. Are you sure about this? Mira asked softly. Elias nodded, his face set with determination. I have no other choice. With that, Mira began to chant in a language that Elias couldn't understand, the words strange and ancient, filled with power. The symbols on the altar began to glow brighter, the energy in the cave building to a fever pitch. Elias felt his body tense, the power of the ritual rushing through him, pulling at his soul. He closed his eyes, ready to give everything for the chance to free Jonah, to break the cycle of blood and sacrifice that had bound his family to Hollowfield for generations. But just as he prepared to offer himself in exchange, something unexpected happened. A voice, soft but unmistakable, echoed in his mind. Elias. It was Jonah's voice. The voice, the whisper of Jonah, lingered in the darkness of Elias's mind like a flicker of light in an otherwise suffocating void. It was faint, barely audible over the growing hum of the cave, but it was there, unmistakable. Elias's heart skipped a beat, the power of the ritual suddenly faltering beneath the weight of his brother's presence, or what remained of it. Elias. Jonah's voice called again, desperate, strained. His hands trembled as he reached out toward the altar, the ancient symbols glowing beneath his fingertips. The air around him thickened, growing colder, heavier, as if the very essence of Hollowfield was tightening its grip around his chest. "Jonah," Elias whispered, his voice catching in his throat. "Is it really you?" For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The cave around them felt suspended in time, as if everything, his past, his future, his brother, hung in a delicate balance. The whispers of the entity grew louder, but now they were interwoven with Jonah's voice, a strange cacophony that both comforted and terrified him. "I never left you, Elias. I'm still here, trapped in this place, this land. It won't let me go. Neither of us will be free unless you break the pact. But you have to be ready for what it costs." The words cut through Elias like a blade. The voice was familiar, comforting, but it was also tinged with an unbearable sadness. Break the pact. His brother wasn't just asking him to save him. He was asking him to sever the tie that had bound their family to Hollowfield, to destroy the very thing that kept them alive, at a cost that could tear them apart forever. "You have to let go of me, Elias. You have to save yourself." Jonah's voice continued, growing weaker, fading into the dark corners of Elias's mind. "If you keep fighting, you'll lose everything. Not just me. Everything." A wave of cold fear washed over Elias, his breath catching in his throat as he tried to comprehend the magnitude of what Jonah was asking. Let go of him. How could he? His brother, his blood, was trapped in this place, a part of him lost to the land, a part of him begging to be freed. But then there was the other part of the voice, the one that chilled Elias to the bone. "The price of freedom is everything you've ever known, your past, your memories, your identity. If you break the pact, it's not just my soul you'll free." The full weight of what Jonah was saying crashed down on Elias, and for the first time he understood. The entity was not simply seeking a sacrifice. It demanded everything. To free Jonah's soul would require the very essence of Elias. His memories, his love for his brother, his guilt, his very identity. He would lose everything. Elias's fingers twitched as he stood frozen, the weight of the decision paralyzing him. The air in the cave seemed to pulse, pushing in on him, as if the land itself was waiting for his choice. The rituals, the sacrifices, the blood, they all led to this moment. And now, Elias stood on the precipice of a decision that would either break the curse or plunge him into a darkness deeper than he could imagine. I don't know if I can," Elias whispered, his voice shaking. "How can I choose between you and everything I am?" There was a long silence, and for a moment, Elias felt utterly alone. The voice of Jonah faded, replaced by the relentless murmuring of the entity that had always been a shadow on the edges of his life. The whispering grew louder, pressing against his ears, as though the land itself was pushing him toward an answer. But the answer, he realized, was no longer in his hands. The land had been feeding on his family for generations. It had been a part of his bloodline, a parasite that had controlled him since birth. "You must choose." Mira's voice cut through his thoughts, pulling him back to the present. She stepped forward, her eyes shadowed with concern and something darker, a realization that seemed to settle in her gut. "Elias, you need to understand. The pact was never just about sacrifice. It was about control. The entity has been controlling you, controlling everything here. Your family, your memories. They've all been part of the ritual, part of the cycle. But Jonah's soul," Elias's voice faltered. "How can I leave him trapped here?" "You're not leaving him, Elias," Mira said, her tone softer now. "You're freeing him. But you have to understand the cost. You'll be freeing him from this land, but in doing so, you risk losing everything. You can't have it both ways. The entity is tied to your bloodline. You've inherited this curse, but you also have the power to end it for all of us. Elias turned to look at her, his eyes hollow. End it? How? What do I do? The ritual, Mira said. The altar, it has the power to sever the connection. If you complete the ritual, you break the pact, but there's no turning back. Once the connection is severed, the entity's hold on you will be gone. But your memories, your family, your connection to the past, it'll all be erased. You'll be free, Elias, but at what cost? Elias's heart thundered in his chest, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He could feel the cold of the cave seeping deeper into his bones, the whispers around him intensifying, swirling with voices that had long been silenced by time and guilt. It was as if everything was suddenly rushing at him, the weight of his decisions crashing down, demanding that he choose. Jonah's voice came again, faint but clear. You've always been the one to carry this burden, Elias. I'm sorry. I never wanted you to carry this alone. But it's not just my freedom that you need to fight for. It's yours too. Elias felt his pulse race as the pieces began to fall into place. It wasn't just about Jonah. It had never been just about Jonah. The curse had tied them all to the land, and the only way to end it was to destroy the connection entirely. To sever the ties, to free them both, all of them, from the chains that had bound them for so long. He had to make the choice that would break the curse or damn them all forever. I'll do it, Elias said, his voice firm now, tinged with the finality of his decision. I'll break the pact, I'll free Jonah, and I'll free myself. The words left his mouth, and for a brief moment, he thought he saw a flicker of light in the darkness. A figure, his brother standing just beyond the altar. For a moment, Jonah's face was clear, smiling, peaceful. Then, just as quickly, the light dimmed and the vision disappeared. Elias stepped forward, reaching for the altar once more. This was it, the final act, the moment where everything would change. His memories, his life, his connection to the past. They were all hanging in the balance. But as his hand hovered over the symbols, a final question echoed through his mind. Was he ready to lose it all? The ritual began. The ground trembled beneath Elias's feet as his fingers made contact with the stone altar. The symbols on its surface flared to life, casting an eerie, blood-red glow that illuminated the cave's shadowy depths. A cold wind surged through the chamber, and the whispers, once distant, now howled in Elias's ears, urgent and suffocating. It was as if the land itself had awakened, the entity sensing the completion of the ritual, the severing of the bond that had chained it to his bloodline for generations. Elias closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. His chest felt tight, as though he were drowning in a sea of memories he had long since buried. He had known the price. He had understood it from the moment he stepped into Hollowfield, from the moment he had walked into the depths of the cave. He knew what would happen if he completed the ritual. He would lose everything, his family, his identity, his past, the life he had once known. But if he didn't do this, if he didn't end the curse, it would consume him. It would consume Jonah. The land, the entity, would keep taking, keep feeding off the souls of those trapped within its grip, including his own. Hollowfield would never be free, not unless Elias made the ultimate sacrifice. His hand trembled as he pressed harder against the altar. The ritual had begun, the power of the pact now binding him, chaining him to this final act. The ground shook again, a violent tremor that sent loose stones crashing to the floor. The temperature dropped, and Elias could feel the entity's presence. A heavy, suffocating weight pressing in from every side, filling the space with its ancient hunger. And then, as if the very fabric of the cave had torn open, The whispers stopped. In the suffocating silence, Elias felt the unmistakable pull of something dark, something powerful, settling over him. It was as if the cave had opened a door into another realm, one that lay just beneath the surface of the earth. It wasn't a physical door. No, this was something deeper, something that connected the land itself to the souls it had claimed over the years. Suddenly the air around Elias was thick with the presence of the past. Memories began to flood him, sharp and violent like flashes of light in the dark. He saw himself as a child again, playing in the woods with Jonah. He felt the warmth of his brother's laughter, the sense of security that had once existed between them. And then the memory shifted, like a dream morphing into something darker. Jonah's face, his eyes wide with terror, his body falling into the abyss of the caves, the sound of rock and earth crashing as he disappeared. Elias had reached for him, had called out for him, but he couldn't save him. He had failed Jonah. The memories of his family flooded in next. His mother's empty eyes, the way she had withdrawn into herself after Jonah's death. His father, distant, cold, as if he had known this moment would come, as if he had prepared for it. They hadn't told Elias the truth. They hadn't told him what his family had done, what price they had paid, and they hadn't told him that one day he would be the one to bear the cost. The echoes of those memories clung to him, wrapping around his soul like chains, trying to pull him deeper into the past. He could feel the weight of every lost moment, every unanswered question, every regret he had ever carried. The cost of the pact wasn't just a soul. It was the essence of who he was, the pieces of his life that had been stolen from him without his knowing. The whispers returned, louder this time, overwhelming his senses. They weren't just voices now. They were faces, specters of the past, shadows of the people he had once known, faces of the Rooks, the ancestors who had made the pact, who had fed the land with blood and sacrifice. Their eyes were hollow, their mouths twisted in silent screams. They were all here, bound to the land, and they were waiting for Elias to join them. "Jonah!" Elias shouted, his voice breaking through the noise. "I'm here. I'm going to free you!" The ground beneath him rumbled again, but this time it felt different. It wasn't the tremor of power. It was the trembling of something desperate, something fragile. Elias's vision blurred, and the faces around him distorted. He reached out, his hands trembling as the darkness closed in. In the chaos of sound and shadows, he felt a hand, cold, thin, and familiar, grip his wrist. His breath caught in his throat as he looked down. It was Jonah, his brother, alive. Or was it just the shadow of him? The soul that had been trapped here for so long. The soul that had been fed to the land as part of the pact. Jonah's face was gaunt, his eyes wide with terror. But there was something else, something deeply wrong in his gaze. "Elias," Jonah whispered, his voice weak but clear. You don't understand. You can't break it." Elias froze, his heart slamming against his chest. "What do you mean?" "I'm here, Jonah. I'm freeing you." Jonah's eyes flickered, as though he were struggling to remain in this world. "The land, the entity, it doesn't want to be freed. It's never been about us, Elias. It's never been about freeing souls. It's been feeding off us. Our blood, our memories, our pain." The words cut through Elias like a blade. The air around him seemed to thicken, the shadows closing in tighter. "Then what have I been doing? What have I been trying to free you from?" Jonah's grip on his wrist tightened, but it wasn't the warmth of his brother's hand. It was cold, unnatural, like the touch of a thing that didn't belong in this world. "Freeing me," Jonah said slowly, "will not free you." Elias's heart raced, as the full weight of Jonah's words crashed over him. Freeing Jonah from the curse, from the pact. Yes, that was the goal. But in doing so, Elias would lose everything. His memories, his past, his very sense of self. He would become nothing more than a shadow, a remnant of the man he once was. The realization hit him like a tidal wave, knocking the breath from his lungs. The land would not just take his brother, it would take him too. It would consume him, devour him, and in doing so, Elias would become just another part of the curse, a ghost among the many that had already been swallowed. Jonah, Elias gasped, his voice breaking. What do I do? Jonah's eyes flickered one last time, fading. As the darkness closed in, you can't undo it. The curse, it's tied to the land, to us. If you break it, you will become it. There's no escape. There's only the choice of what kind of legacy you want to leave. With those final words, Jonah's presence vanished, swallowed by the growing darkness. Elias stood alone in the cave, his hands still gripping the altar, his mind reeling with the devastating truth. The land, the entity, had been feeding on their pain, on their blood, on their very souls for generations. It was a cycle that couldn't be broken, not without everything falling apart. And yet, Elias could still feel the weight of the choice pressing on him. He could still feel the pull to act, to finish what he had started. But what was the cost? The cave was silent once again, the darkness pressing in on Elias like a physical force. His fingers still clutched the altar, cold and trembling, the faint echo of Jonah's voice lingering in his mind like a distant memory he couldn't escape. His heart beat erratically, his thoughts jumbled, a cacophony of confusion and fear. The world around him felt unreal, dreamlike, as if the lines between the living and the dead, the real and the imagined, were blurring beyond recognition. What do I do? The question reverberated in his mind like a hammer against stone, but no answers came. Jonah was gone, his presence fading into the shadows as the entity grew stronger, its grip on the land tightening with every passing second. Elias could still hear the whispers, the tortured souls that had been claimed by Hollowfield's curse, but they weren't just in the cave anymore. They had followed him, their voices drifting in and out of his consciousness, twisting into a horrible symphony of regret, grief, and despair. The altar beneath his hands pulsed with an unnatural energy, a low hum that vibrated through his fingertips and into his bones. It felt alive, as if the very stone was feeding on his emotions, on his internal conflict. The cost, it echoed through him, the words that had been spoken by Jonah, by Mira, by the land itself. Elias stumbled backward, away from the altar, his breathing shallow. He couldn't stay here, not anymore. Not while the land and the curse clawed at him, threatening to drag him deeper into the abyss. He turned, his feet unsteady, and began to move toward the exit. The whispers followed him, louder now, urging him to stop, to finish what he had started. But Elias knew that if he stayed, if he allowed the ritual to continue, he would lose himself. He would become nothing more than a part of the land's cycle, a ghost among the many trapped here for eternity. Suddenly, the ground shook violently beneath his feet, and the cave trembled as if it were alive, as if the entity itself was awakening from its slumber. Elias fell to his knees, his body crashing against the cold stone floor. The world spun, and in the chaos, he felt a strange sensation like a pull, an invisible force tugging at him, drawing him back toward the altar. The whispers grew louder, frantic, their voices now a cacophony of anguish. Jonah. Elias's eyes snapped open, his mind reeling with the intensity of the vision. In the midst of the darkness, he saw Jonah's face again. His brother, no longer the shadowy spectre he had been before, but now clear and vivid, standing in front of him. The look in Jonah's eyes was not one of terror or regret. It was a look of understanding, acceptance, a plea. "I'm sorry, Elias." Jonah's voice echoed through his mind, soft and steady. "This was never meant to be your burden. You've carried it for so long, but now it's time for you to let go. You need to release me, and release yourself." Elias's chest tightened. The vision of Jonah reached out, his form flickering, his image dissolving into the mist of the cave. "But how?" Elias whispered, his voice broken. "How do I let go of you? How do I free you?" Jonah's form faded further, his words more distant now but still clear. "By breaking the cycle, Elias. The curse isn't just in the land, it's in your heart. You've held on to the guilt, the pain, for so long, but it's not yours to carry anymore. Let it go. Let me go." Tears blurred Elias's vision as his brother's voice faded, replaced by the oppressive, suffocating silence of the cave. The whispers were gone, and for a brief, terrifying moment, Elias was alone in the darkness. His mind reeled with Jonah's last words, but there was no time to process them. The land, the entity, was still waiting for him, waiting for the final decision. Elias's hand hovered over his heart, his fingers trembling as he thought about everything that had led him here. Hollowfield, the curse, his family, the loss, the guilt. He had spent so long trying to uncover the truth, to undo the wrongs of the past. But now, he understood what Jonah had meant. It wasn't just about the curse or the land. It was about him, about the burden he had carried for so long, the weight of memories he had refused to release. And in that moment, Elias realized that the only way to free Jonah, to break the cycle, was to release the grip of the past on his own soul. He had to forgive himself. He had to let go of the guilt, the regret, and the endless question of whether he could have saved his brother. "Let go," Jonah had said. "Let me go." Elias stood, his body shaking, his heart heavy with the weight of the decision before him. He turned, back toward the altar, his gaze steady now, filled with a new sense of resolve. The ritual was still in his hands, but the power to finish it, truly finish it, didn't lie in the altar or the land or the entity that had enslaved his family for centuries. It lay within him. The power to break the cycle, to release his brother and himself, was not in the land, it was in his heart. He took a deep breath, the air now thick with the weight of the past, and then, without hesitation, he reached forward, his fingers brushing against the stone once more. "I release you, Jonah," Elias whispered, the words thick with emotion. "I release us." The moment his hand made contact with the altar, a violent shockwave of energy coursed through the cave, the force so intense that Elias was thrown back, his body crashing into the stone floor. His head spun, and for a moment he felt as if he were being torn apart, his very soul ripped from his body. But then, just as suddenly as it had come, the sensation stopped. Elias lay there gasping for air, the silence of the cave enveloping him once more. The whispers were gone, the tremors had stopped, and when he opened his eyes, he felt a profound stillness inside himself, a peace that he had never known before. He slowly stood, his legs unsteady but stronger than before. And as he looked around, he saw that the cave was different now. The shadows that had once haunted him were gone, replaced by a soft, ethereal glow that seemed to radiate from the very stone. The land had released its grip on him, and Hollowfield no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a memory. The curse had been broken. Elias took one last look at the altar, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly free. The calm that followed the ritual felt surreal, almost otherworldly. Elias stood motionless, his senses still reeling from the intensity of what he had just experienced. The oppressive atmosphere of Hollowfield, the weight of its curse, its ancient rituals, its unspoken darkness, had lifted. And yet, despite the clarity that now hung in the air, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that something was still terribly wrong. The air was no longer cold or suffocating. The cave, once a claustrophobic labyrinth of secrets, now seemed vast, its oppressive energy transformed into something almost serene. But the silence that surrounded him felt too complete, too final. Hollowfield had been freed from its curse, but so much had been lost in the process. He had freed Jonah, he had freed the land, but what had he truly gained? Elias turned, searching. The cave, half expecting some final manifestation of the entity to confront him, some last vestige of the darkness that had haunted him and his family for generations. But there was nothing, just the soft, pulsing glow that seemed to emanate from the altar, and the faintest echo of a memory, the whispered words of his brother. "Let go. Let me go." But even as the land seemed to settle, even as the weight of the curse seemed to vanish from his shoulders, Elias felt the raw ache of the sacrifice, the cost that had been paid. His memories of Jonah, once so vivid, now seemed distant, like fading photographs on the edge of his mind. The past was slipping through his fingers, and no matter how hard he tried to grasp it, the images and the emotions seemed to vanish. Was that the price? The loss of everything he had held dear? He closed his eyes, trying to hold on to those memories. The laughter of his brother, the warmth of their shared past. But they were slipping away, and in their place was an overwhelming emptiness. He felt as though the very essence of who he was slowly unraveling, a thread pulled free, one memory at a time. A rustling sound broke his reverie, pulling him back to the present. Elias turned, his heart racing, expecting to see Mira and Liam, but his eyes locked on a figure in the distance. His breath caught in his throat. It was Maureen. She stood at the mouth of the cave, silhouetted by the soft light of the moon. Her figure was faint, as if she were more a memory than a physical presence. But she was there, and in her eyes, Elias saw something he hadn't expected. Relief, sorrow, and something deeper, a knowing sadness that seemed to stretch beyond the confines of time. "I thought I might find you here," Maureen said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've done it, haven't you?" Elias nodded, his throat tight. "I broke the curse. Hollowfield is free." Maureen didn't speak immediately. She just stood there, her eyes distant as though searching for something just out of reach. Finally, she stepped closer, her presence filling the space with an unexpected warmth. "You've freed them all, Elias," Maureen said, her voice low, almost mournful. "But you've freed yourself too. The weight of the curse. It was never just about the land. It was about all of you. And you've carried it for so long. But now..." She faltered for a moment, as if unsure of her next words. "Now you have to let go of it. You have to let go of the memories, the pain. You have to choose who you want to be without it." Elias felt a wave of confusion sweep over him, a sense of loss so intense that it threatened to swallow him whole. "What do you mean? What happens now?" Maureen's expression softened. "The curse is over, but its consequences are still with you. The ritual, the price you paid. It takes more than just your past. It takes part of your soul. And when you sever that connection, when you break the pact, you lose the things that once made you who you were. Your memories, your pain, your identity. It all fades. And you have to decide what you're left with." Elias shook his head, his mind spinning. "No, I didn't want to lose them. I didn't want to forget." "I know," Maureen said quietly, stepping closer to him. But you can't hold on to everything, Elias. Some things are too heavy to carry. Some memories are too painful to keep. You've done what you could. You've broken the curse. You've freed Jonah, freed the land. But you've also freed yourself from the burden of the past. Elias looked at her, his heart aching with the realization that Maureen was right. The weight of the years spent buried in grief, in guilt, in the endless cycle of Hollowfield's curse. It had all been leading to this. He had given everything to save Jonah, to end the curse. But now, it seemed as though something essential had been taken from him. His connection to the past, his brother, his memories. The silence stretched between them. The only sound, the soft rustling of leaves outside the cave. The only sensation, the gnawing emptiness in his chest. He had broken the cycle. He had freed them all. But in doing so, he had lost a part of himself. A part that he might never get back. "I'm not sure who I am anymore," Elias said, his voice cracking. "What's left of me, Maureen? What's left when all the memories are gone?" Maureen placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch warm, steady. "You're still you, Elias. You've always been you. But now you have the chance to be something else. You've been given the freedom to choose, to decide who you are without the burden of the past weighing you down. Hollowfield may be free, but so are you." Elias stood there, his mind racing, his heart heavy with the weight of everything he had lost. But in that moment, he understood. He wasn't bound to Hollowfield anymore. The past would always be a part of him. But he had the chance to move forward, to rebuild, to find a new path. He had the chance to heal. And for the first time in a long time, Elias felt the weight on his shoulders lighten, even if only a little. He took a deep breath, turning to look at Maureen. "I think I'm ready." She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Then let's go, Elias. It's time to leave Hollowfield behind." Together they turned toward the entrance of the cave, the moonlight illuminating the path before them. Hollowfield, its curse, its pain, its loss. It was all behind them now, and ahead of them was a new beginning. The moon hung low in the sky as Elias and Maureen emerged from the cave, the light casting long shadows across the forest that surrounded Hollowfield. The air was cool and crisp, the forest eerily still in the wake of the ritual. It felt as though the world had taken a deep breath and was holding it, waiting for the inevitable exhale. Hollowfield had been broken free from its curse, but Elias knew, deep down, that the price was far steeper than he had anticipated. He had released Jonah's soul. He had freed the land. But now, he felt the weight of the silence pressing down on him. Behind them, the cave loomed like a dark memory, its mouth agape, the flickering remnants of the ritual still pulsing in the earth below. But in front of them, the forest stretched out, a vast unknown. For the first time, Elias had no destination, no pull, no tie to the past. It was just him and the future, whatever it might hold. But the stillness of the night was deceptive. Beneath the calm, Elias could feel something stirring, something out of place, something wrong. The land, though freed from the entity's curse, had left its mark on him. He could feel it in the air around him, a strange vibration in his chest, a subtle tug at his senses. The boundary between the world he knew and the world he had just severed felt fragile, like paper between his fingers, like it might crumble at any moment. As they walked through the forest, Maureen remained silent, her face set in a quiet, solemn expression. She had always been the one who kept her emotions hidden behind layers of time and regret. But tonight, even she seemed shaken, as though the land itself had claimed something from her, too. Elias's thoughts raced. He had freed Jonah. He had freed Hollowfield. But why did he feel so hollow? Why did everything seem to be slipping away, fading like a dream he couldn't remember when he woke up? The further they walked, the more the feeling of unease began to grow. The quiet of the night, once calming, now felt suffocating, oppressive. The trees no longer stood as guardians but as looming witnesses to something unfinished. Elias could feel their eyes on him, the weight of ancient knowledge in every bough and leaf, as though they had seen it all before, watched as every generation before him had failed, had sacrificed, had lost. Was I just another link in the chain? He stopped. His breath caught in his throat. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was following him, lurking just beyond his senses. He turned, eyes darting through the trees, half expecting the shadows to spring to life, to reveal some hidden threat. But there was nothing. Just the whisper of the wind, the rustling of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl. The forest was unchanged. But the stillness was not the stillness of peace. It was the stillness before the storm. "Maureen," Elias said, his voice hoarse, almost uncertain. "Do you feel it? Like something is still here? Like something's not right?" Maureen stopped, her gaze fixed on the path ahead. She didn't answer at first, and Elias felt a creeping sense of dread claw at him, urging him to speak, to break the silence. "It's not just you," she said finally, her voice soft but heavy with understanding. "The land is unsettled. It's free, yes, but that freedom was never meant to be given. The curse, Elias, it wasn't just a chain. It was a part of the land. It was woven into everything, and breaking it leaves a void. A hole." Elias's heart raced. "A hole," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean?" Maureen turned to face him, her expression weary. "A hole in the fabric of reality itself. The entity was tied to the land, yes. But its power wasn't just rooted in the land. It was connected to the very pulse of life here. The curse, the cycle of sacrifice, of blood, it balanced the land. And now that balance is gone. Hollowfield is free, but something else has been set loose." Elias's stomach dropped. "What do you mean, something else? What have I done?" Maureen's gaze was distant now, her eyes clouded with regret. "You didn't just break the pact, Elias. You broke the land's balance. The land was feeding on that sacrifice, but now that it's lost its anchor, it's unhinged. The entity is gone, but it's left behind a gaping wound, and that wound has begun to bleed. It's tearing through the fabric of reality itself. Hollowfield isn't just free, it's unstable, and so are we." Elias took a step back, his mind racing. His thoughts spiraled as he tried to process what she was saying. The land was unstable. The very earth beneath him, the very place that had been the cradle of his family's suffering, was now collapsing. But it wasn't just the land that was changing. It was him too. A low rumble echoed through the ground beneath their feet, and Elias felt it, the vibration, deep in his bones, a tremor that seemed to come from the very heart of Hollowfield itself. His breath caught in his throat, and Maureen's eyes widened, a flash of fear crossing her face. "We need to leave." "Now," Maureen said, her voice tense, urgent. Elias nodded, his legs moving almost instinctively as they began to run. The forest, once still and serene, now felt alive with a strange energy, as though the trees themselves were warping, bending in response to the shifting of reality. The wind howled louder, the rustling of leaves now a frantic cacophony, as though the very land was struggling to stay intact. Elias could hear the rumbling again, louder this time, shaking the ground beneath his feet. It wasn't an earthquake, not quite, but something far more sinister. The air was thick with the weight of something broken, something torn open, a wound that refused to heal. His thoughts were clouded with fear, with the overwhelming sense that they were running from something they couldn't even understand. He turned to look at Maureen, his breath ragged. "What do we do, Maureen? What happens now?" Maureen didn't answer immediately. She was scanning the woods, her face pale, her expression strained. "We can't outrun this. The land, it's not just a place anymore. It's a force, and we're a part of it now, whether we want to be or not." The rumbling grew louder, the ground shaking beneath them, and Elias knew, with terrifying clarity, that they were running out of time. Hollowfield's curse had been broken, but in breaking it, they had unleashed something far worse than they could ever have imagined. The land itself had begun to bleed. Still here? Brave. Or maybe you just like the feeling of being watched. Like, subscribe, and drop your time and location in the comments, so we know who's still out there. Now breathe slow. The worst is coming. The rumbling intensified, and Elias's heart raced in sync with the tremors beneath his feet. Every step he took felt like a race against something far more powerful than him, something ancient and hungry. The trees swayed violently, their branches creaking under the force of the shifting land, as though the very forest was reacting to the instability within it. Hollowfield was unraveling, and it was dragging everything down with it. Elias's breath came in ragged gasps as he glanced over at Maureen. Her face was tight, the lines of her expression more strained than he had ever seen them. She moved quickly, but there was no mistaking the fear in her eyes. The ground trembled beneath their feet, the very earth beneath them buckling as if the land were trying to swallow them whole. "We need to get to the town," Maureen called over her shoulder, her voice cutting through the noise of the forest. "It's the only place where we can find answers." Elias nodded, though the words didn't make sense to him. The town? What could they find there that would fix this? But he followed her anyway, his feet moving almost instinctively, driven by the overwhelming need to outrun the collapse that was tearing Hollowfield apart. They pushed through the dense woods, the trees groaning as though they were in pain. The air grew thicker, the vibrations of the land pulsing stronger with each passing second. Elias couldn't escape the feeling that they were being followed by something intangible, something watching from the edges of reality itself. As they neared the outskirts of Hollowfield, Elias's mind raced with thoughts of the past, the ritual, the pact, the curse. He had thought that breaking it would free them, that releasing Jonah's soul would end it all. But now he understood. By breaking the pact, they had only made things worse. They had severed the balance that had held Hollowfield together for centuries, and the land was retaliating, unraveling in the wake of that action. Elias's legs burned, but he pushed forward, unable to stop now. They had to find something, anything, that could help them understand what was happening. The town, once a place of quiet decay, now felt like the last place of refuge, even though Elias knew deep down that nothing here could truly save them. They reached the edge of the town, the crumbling buildings standing like hollowed-out shells, remnants of a place that had long been forgotten by time. The streets, once filled with people, were now empty, save for the occasional shadow that flickered at the corners of Elias's vision. But the real horror lay in what he saw ahead of him. At the center of the town square stood an enormous structure, something Elias had never seen before. It was like a twisted, broken monument, the remnants of an ancient building, its walls cracked and crumbling. The air around it was thick with an unnatural energy, a presence that seemed to pulse in the very air. This is where it all began," Maureen whispered, her voice distant, filled with awe and terror. She stopped in front of the structure, her eyes locked on it as though it were the only thing in the world that mattered. "This is the heart of Hollowfield." Elias stood frozen, staring at the structure, feeling the weight of its presence, the oppressive force that radiated from it. He had never seen anything like it. The air around it hummed with an energy that was both terrifying and magnetic. It was as if this place had always been there, hidden beneath the layers of time and history, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. "Maureen," Elias said, his voice shaking. "What is this? What is happening?" Maureen didn't answer at first. She just stepped forward, her face pale and drawn. "This is the source of the curse," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is where the pact was made, where everything began." Elias's mind raced. I thought, the pact was broken. We freed Jonah. We freed the land." Maureen turned to him, her eyes filled with a deep sadness. "We freed the land, Elias, but we didn't break the true source of the curse. The entity that bound your family to this place, it's still here. The pact wasn't just a promise made by your ancestors, it was a binding, an agreement between this land and something far older. The land, it was the entity." Elias's breath caught in his throat. "What? The land was the entity?" Maureen nodded. "The land wasn't just a victim, Elias. It was a participant in the pact. The entity, it was never a separate force. It was the land. And now that the balance has been broken, now that the land has been freed from the pact, it's trying to reclaim what it has lost." Elias staggered backward, his head spinning. The ground beneath him seemed to shift, as if the earth itself was alive, reacting to the words Maureen had just spoken. His thoughts were racing, trying to piece together the shattered fragments of truth that were being revealed to him. Everything he thought he knew, everything he had done to break the curse, was now unraveling in front of him. "So, what now?" Elias whispered, his voice thick with dread. "What happens if the land tries to reclaim itself? What happens if we haven't actually freed anyone?" Maureen's eyes darkened, the weight of the knowledge sinking in. "The land will begin to collapse, Elias. The curse isn't just about souls, it's about power. The land feeds off the sacrifices, but it also feeds on the memories, the pain, the blood. If the entity isn't fully severed from the land, it will reclaim everything that has been lost, including you." Elias's pulse quickened. "Including me." He felt the weight of those words pressing against him like a vice. He had broken the curse. He had freed Jonah. He had saved Hollowfield. But had he really? Or had he merely made the situation worse? The ground rumbled again, a deep, guttural noise that seemed to come from the earth itself. A low, resonant hum filled the air, vibrating through Elias's chest like a heartbeat. The monument in the town square trembled, its broken form shifting as if it were alive. The air around them crackled with an almost tangible energy, a feeling of inevitability that made Elias's skin crawl. Maureen turned to face him, her eyes filled with grim determination. "We need to go back. We need to finish what we started." Elias's stomach churned. "Finish what? We did finish it. We broke the pact." Maureen shook her head slowly. "No, Elias. You freed the souls, but you haven't released the land. You haven't freed the entity that bound everything together, and until that is done, Hollowfield won't be free. It will collapse into nothing, taking everyone with it. The only way to stop this now is to destroy the heart of Hollowfield. The entity must be severed completely." Elias felt the ground tremble again beneath his feet, the rumbling growing louder, more intense. He could feel it now, something pulling at him, tugging at his very soul. He was no longer just a bystander in Hollowfield's fate. He was a part of it. And if he didn't act soon, if he didn't finish what he had started, the land would claim him and everything he had fought for, forever. "Then let's finish it," Elias said, his voice steady, filled with the weight of his decision. "Let's end it once and for all." The wind howled through the empty streets of Hollowfield, the trees trembling under its force, as if the land itself were trying to shake free of some unseen weight. Elias stood at the edge of the town square, staring at the crumbling monument that loomed ahead, its broken form casting long, distorted shadows across the ground. The rumbling beneath him had not stopped. If anything, it had only grown louder, more insistent, like the land itself was trying to tear through the fabric of reality, to reclaim what it had lost. Elias knew what had to be done. The pact had been broken, but Hollowfield was not free. It had become something else, something darker, something that had never truly been bound to the land, not entirely. The land had been the entity, and now, with the balance shattered, it was trying to swallow everything back into its depths, to consume the very essence of what had kept Hollowfield alive. The only way to stop it is to destroy the heart of Hollowfield. He turned to Maureen, her face drawn tight with the weight of the knowledge she had just shared with him. There was no turning back now. No more questions, no more hesitation. The ritual that had bound his family to this place, to this curse, had to be undone completely, and to do that, they had to destroy the entity at the center of it all, the heart of Hollowfield. Maureen's eyes met his, and in them, Elias saw something like regret, like fear. She had known all along what the land would do once it was freed from the curse, but even she hadn't fully understood the consequences until now. It was as if the land, once liberated, had begun to reveal its true nature, something far more ancient, far more insidious than they could have imagined. "You know what we have to do," Maureen said, her voice low, steady, though her hands were clenched at her sides. "But you need to understand, Elias, there's no coming back from this. If we destroy the heart, the entity, we'll undo everything. Everything that's ever been tied to Hollowfield will be lost. And that includes you." Elias stared at the ground beneath his feet, feeling the tremors that ran through the earth, reverberating through his bones. He could feel it. The weight of the land pulling at him, calling to him, demanding that he remain a part of it. The land had always had a hold on him, even before he understood the full extent of his family's involvement in the curse. But now, he could feel the land's hunger, its desire to consume him, to take him back into its embrace. "You're a part of it now, Elias, and if you destroy the heart, you'll be gone forever." The words echoed in his mind, a reminder of everything he stood to lose. Jonah's soul had been freed. Hollowfield had been liberated from its cycle of sacrifice, but Elias hadn't thought about what it meant for him, what it meant for his very identity. The land had been a parasite, feeding on the blood and memories of his family for generations. But in freeing Hollowfield, in severing the connection, he had freed himself too. He had severed the bond between his soul and the land. But was it enough? Could he truly leave it all behind? "I understand," Elias said, his voice a quiet whisper, but filled with the weight of finality. "But if we don't destroy it, everything will collapse, and we'll all be lost." Maureen nodded, though her face remained tight with sorrow. "Yes, but understand this, Elias. The land will take everything from you if you destroy it. You'll lose yourself, the memories, the pain, the guilt, everything that made you, you. And when it's gone, there will be nothing left. The idea of losing everything, of forgetting Jonah, of losing the person he had once been, it felt like a part of him was being torn away, leaving only an empty shell behind. But in his heart, Elias knew that this was the only way to stop the cycle, the only way to free everyone from Hollowfield's curse. The rumbling grew louder, more intense, and Elias could feel the land pushing back as if it had sensed their decision. The ground beneath them cracked, splitting open as though the earth itself were rejecting their interference. The air grew thick with an energy that was both suffocating and electrifying, a final warning from the land itself. "This is it," Maureen said, her voice shaking, but there was no turning back. "Once we do this, there's no undoing it. You'll be erased from Hollowfield's history, from its memory. There'll be nothing left of you but dust." Elias felt his breath catch in his throat. Nothing left but dust. That was the price. The cost of breaking the cycle, of freeing the land, was not just his memories, but his very identity. He would be nothing more than a forgotten name, a shadow in the history of Hollowfield, lost to the land that had once claimed him. He looked at Maureen one last time, her face filled with understanding. "Are you ready, Maureen? Are you ready to destroy it?" Maureen nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I've been ready for this for a long time, Elias." The ground rumbled again, more violently this time, as if the earth itself was protesting their decision. But there was no turning back now. Elias stepped forward, his hand trembling as he reached out toward the broken monument, the source of Hollowfield's curse, the heart of the land. As his hand brushed against the stone, an immense pressure pressed down on him, like the weight of the entire world bearing down on his shoulders. The earth beneath him shuddered, the ground cracking, open around him, the sky above darkening as the very fabric of reality began to unravel. This was it, the final step. With a deep breath, Elias slammed his hand against the monument, and as he did, the earth itself seemed to scream, a deafening sound that reverberated through his body, through his soul. The land fought back, resisting the destruction, but Elias held firm. The final revelation had been made. The curse, the land, the entity, it was all coming to an end. For a moment, everything went still. Then, as the monument crumbled, the earth groaned and shifted, and Hollowfield began to collapse into itself. The sky darkened, the wind howling, with a ferocity that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality. The land was being destroyed, but so was he. He could feel it in his bones, the loss of his past, the fading of his memories. And yet, in that moment, Elias felt something else. Not fear, not regret, but something like peace. He had broken the cycle. He had freed Jonah. He had freed himself. Even if it meant losing everything. The land trembled one last time, and then there was silence. Hollowfield was gone. The curse was broken. Elias was free. The wind had finally stopped. The ground no longer rumbled with the terrifying tremors of Hollowfield's death throes. The monument had crumbled to dust beneath Elias's hands, and with it, the very land that had bound his family for generations. A suffocating silence followed, an absence of sound so complete that it felt as though the entire world had ceased to exist for just a moment. Elias stood amidst the ruins, his hands trembling, his body exhausted from the weight of the decision he had made. His mind felt as though it were pulling away from him, as though the act of destroying Hollowfield, of severing the connection, had started to erase him from the fabric of reality itself. He had known it would come to this. He had known that the price of freedom would be his own sacrifice. But knowing it and living it were two entirely different things. The air around him was still, the remnants of the land's power dissipating into the atmosphere. Hollowfield, the place he had fought so hard to free, was no more. It was nothing but dust and echoes now. The curse was broken, yes, but it had left behind a jagged hole in everything, a gaping wound in the very essence of who Elias had been. He looked around, but nothing was familiar. The trees that had once stood tall and silent were now twisted, their forms contorted and cracked as if the land itself had suffered in its final moments. The buildings of Hollowfield had been reduced to rubble, their skeletal remains barely visible beneath the layers of dust and shattered stone. Maureen stood beside him, her face ashen. her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite name. She had witnessed the destruction too, the same weight of loss, the same erosion of the past. But she didn't speak. Neither of them did. They simply stood there, the reality of what they had done settling between them, like a cold, unspoken truth. "Is it over?" Elias asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. The question felt hollow, empty. He wasn't sure if he was asking Maureen, or if he was asking the land itself. Maureen didn't answer right away. She stared out at the ruins, her gaze distant. "It's over," she said finally, her voice rough. "But it came at a cost. Hollowfield is gone, and so are you. In a way, you've left this place for good. You'll never be able to return to who you were. Not completely." Elias felt a sharp pang of loss at her words, a deep ache that gnawed at him from the inside. It wasn't just the loss of Hollowfield that hurt. It was the loss of himself. His memories of Jonah, of his childhood, of his family. They were already slipping away, like sand through his fingers. The more he tried to hold on to them, the more they faded. His heart tightened in his chest as he thought about his brother, about the life he had lost, the life they had both lost in this place. Jonah's laughter, his presence, his face, those were the things Elias had fought to preserve, the things he had hoped to free. But now, even Jonah seemed like a distant dream. The memories were vanishing with each passing moment. Elias looked at Maureen, his eyes filled with confusion and grief. "I can't remember. I can't remember Jonah anymore. I can't even hold on to my own past." She nodded, her expression somber. "That's the price of freedom, Elias. When you destroy the land, when you break the pact, you erase everything that was tied to it. The entity fed on your memories, your guilt, your pain, and when it was severed, it took those things with it." Elias felt his heart lurch in his chest. "But I can't lose them. I can't forget him." Maureen reached out, her hand touching his arm gently. "You haven't lost everything, Elias. You're still here. You're still alive. The past may be fading, but you're not gone. And you can build something new from what's left." Elias shook his head, tears stinging his eyes. "But it doesn't feel like me anymore. It feels like I've become someone else." "Maybe you have," Maureen said softly. "Maybe who you were is gone, but who you will become is something new. You have the chance to be free now, Elias. You can choose what comes next." The wind picked up again, swirling around them like the remnants of a long-forgotten storm. The forest, the land, the very air seemed to hum with the energy of the change they had wrought. Hollowfield, though gone, had left its mark on everything, and now it was up to Elias to decide what came after. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the land's loss pressing against his chest. He had broken the cycle. He had freed Jonah's soul. He had freed the land. But in doing so, he had lost a part of himself, his memories, his past, his connection to everything he had once known. It was the price of freedom, but was it worth it? Elias looked out at the remnants of Hollowfield. The land was still, its power fading. The last echoes of its presence were being swept away by the wind. And in that silence, Elias realized something that brought a strange peace to his heart. The land had been his prison, and now it was gone. Hollowfield was gone, and so was the curse. He felt the weight of the choice he had made, of the price he had paid, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like freedom. "I think I'm ready," Elias said, his voice steady, though it trembled slightly with the weight of everything he had just lost. "I'm ready to move on." Maureen gave him a small, knowing nod. "Then let's go." Elias took one final look at Hollowfield, at the place that had once defined him, that had once held him captive in its twisted grip. And then he turned away, his steps leading him into the unknown. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Elias didn't fear it. He was free. The sky above Hollowfield had begun to clear, the first traces of dawn breaking through the dark clouds that had loomed overhead for as long as Elias could remember. The land was still. The trees, though twisted and broken, no longer groaned under the weight of the curse. The wind, once violent and unnerving, had calmed, now only a soft breeze that rustled the leaves, carrying with it the faintest scent of pine. But beneath that stillness, there was an emptiness, a profound absence that seemed to stretch across the horizon, as though the very essence of Hollowfield had been wiped from existence. Elias walked alongside Maureen, his steps slow and heavy, each one carrying the weight of everything he had lost. His mind was clouded with fragments, memories of his family, of Jonah, of the life he had lived in this forsaken place. Yet, the more he tried to hold on to those memories, the more they slipped from his grasp, fading like wisps of smoke. He had done it. He had broken the curse. He had freed the land, freed Jonah's soul. But at what cost? His past, his identity, it was all being erased. Each moment, each step, felt like a reminder of the price he had paid to break the cycle. The memories that had once defined him were slipping away, and with each passing second, Elias could feel himself becoming less and less of the man he had been. "I don't know if I can do this," Elias murmured, his voice barely audible over the sound of their footsteps. "I don't know if I can live with who I am now." Maureen didn't respond immediately. She had been quiet since they left the ruins of Hollowfield, her expression unreadable. She had seen it before, seen the way the land had a way of consuming those who tried to break free from its hold. But this was different. Elias wasn't just losing his past, he was losing himself. "You're not losing yourself, Elias," Maureen said finally, her voice soft but firm. "You're rebuilding. You're free now. You've paid the price, and now you have the chance to decide who you want to be." Elias stopped walking and turned to face her. The weight of her words hung in the air like a shroud. "But what if I don't know who I am without all of that? Without Jonah? Without Hollowfield? I've been tied to this place for so long. How do I walk away from it all? How do I become someone else?" Maureen's eyes softened, but there was a hardness to her words. "You've always been more than this place, Elias. You just didn't know it until now." Elias's chest tightened. "But I don't remember. I don't remember anything. It's like I'm fading away, becoming something less than human." Maureen stepped closer, her expression filled with empathy. "That's the hardest part, I know. You'll feel like a ghost for a while. You'll feel empty. But that's not who you are. The land's hold over you is broken. The memories, they're gone, yes, but that doesn't mean you're gone. You have the freedom to shape who you are from here on out. You're not defined by what you've lost. You're defined by what you choose to build next." Elias wanted to believe her. He wanted to grasp onto those words, to find some comfort in them. But it felt like a lie, a cruel irony. How can I rebuild myself when I don't even know what I was before? The sun had fully risen now, casting its golden light across the remnants of the forest, turning the broken trees into ghostly silhouettes in the distance. It was beautiful, but it felt hollow, like a landscape that had been drained of life. Even the air felt different, lighter, as though something had been lifted, but nothing had taken its place. Elias's gaze fell to the ground, the earth beneath. Him, which had once held the weight of 1,000 generations, now felt like a blank slate, as if it had forgotten everything it had ever known. The land was free, yes, But what was left for him? What happens now, Maureen? Elias asked, his voice quiet, tinged with uncertainty. Where do we go from here? Maureen glanced around, her eyes scanning the horizon. The town was gone. The heart of Hollowfield had crumbled to dust, and in its place was a blank, empty space. There was no returning to what had been. We go forward, Elias, we have to. This place, Hollowfield, it's over. But that doesn't mean you can't start again. You can choose your path. You can rebuild. I don't even know how, Elias muttered. I don't know who I am without it. You'll find out, Maureen said simply. You're still here. And that means you still have time. Time to figure it out. Time to make new memories, create new connections. You don't have to carry Hollowfield's weight anymore. It's time to leave it behind. Elias stood there for a long time, staring out at the barren landscape. The weight of Maureen's words was heavy, but the emptiness inside him was heavier still. There was no map for the road ahead, no guide to tell him what came next. All he had was the fragile, terrifying feeling that he was walking into an unknown future, a future where he would have to become someone new, someone unburdened by the past. But how could he do that when the past felt like it was slipping through his fingers? I don't know how, Elias whispered, his voice filled with raw, unspoken grief. But I will try. Maureen nodded, her expression resolute. That's all you can do. With that, they began walking again, though Elias's pace was slower now, more tentative. Each step felt uncertain. And yet, with every moment that passed, Elias could feel something shifting within him, something faint, something fragile, but real. The past was gone, but the future was his. It had to be. He couldn't go back. Hollowfield, the land, the curse, it was all behind him now. But even as he walked away from the ruins, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that something else was waiting for him, a new struggle, a new path. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he felt the weight of that uncertainty lift from his shoulders. The curse was gone. His memories, his past, those were the chains he had carried for so long, and now they were broken. The wind shifted again on the edges of Hollowfield's remains, carrying something Elias couldn't quite name, a sound like breath drawn through hollow wood, a scent like something burned long ago, the kind of shift that made animals go silent, and the skin on your arms rise before you could name why. The kind of shift that didn't belong to this world. He paused mid-step. Maureen walked a few paces ahead before turning. What is it? Elias didn't answer at first. His eyes scanned the surrounding woods, now thinned and grey. He squinted at a crooked tree leaning against the morning sky like a hanged man. There was nothing there, and yet the unease had returned. Not just grief, not just confusion, something deeper, older, something missing. It's quiet, he said at last, his voice barely above a whisper. Too quiet. Maureen frowned. You've never known Hollowfield without the curse, Elias. This is what silence feels like when the land isn't screaming. But he wasn't convinced. It wasn't silence. It was vacancy. He turned slowly, surveying the land around them, the crumbled remnants of homes, the caved-in chapel roof, the faint scent of ash in the dirt. The curse had ended, yes, but something was off. He had expected healing, a slow rebirth. But this place didn't feel like it had been freed. It felt like it had been emptied. The sensation worsened as they passed through what used to be the heart of the town. Birds should have returned by now. Insects. Even the wind should have rustled the brittle leaves scattered across the cracked roads. But there was nothing. The world felt paused. He stopped at the remnants of a tree that had stood at the edge of the old schoolyard, now blackened, split in half. He stared at it, trying to feel something, a memory, a connection, a name. But his mind gave him nothing. Blank slate. And then something moved in the periphery of his vision. He turned sharply. "Did you see that?" he asked, scanning the far tree line. Maureen tensed beside him. "No, but I felt it." They stood still for a moment, the wind no longer passive, but creeping, curious. "What if—" Elias began, then stopped. Maureen looked at him. "Say it." What if the curse wasn't the only thing buried beneath this land? She didn't answer. Elias's thoughts churned with old stories, fragments Maureen had once whispered about ancestral bloodlines, about sacrifices older than the town itself. The deity, the pact, it was all Elias had focused on. That had been the monster, the rot beneath the soil. But the land had been its vessel. And now that vessel was empty. What was it inviting in? They reached the outskirts of Hollowfield's boundary, once marked by an iron arch, now toppled sideways like a broken jaw. Beyond it lay the forest, the deeper woods, wilder, untamed. It was a place neither of them had ventured into since the breaking. But today, the forest didn't just look dense. It looked awake. A low hum began, barely perceptible at first, like wind passing through hollow bone. Elias turned slowly. It wasn't coming from the trees. It was coming from the earth. A vibration beneath their feet. A sensation that stirred something primal in his gut. It reminded him of the feeling he'd had right before Jonah disappeared. That uncanny shift where time and place didn't hold. And then he heard it. A voice. His own name. But not from outside, from within. He staggered back, clutching his temple. Maureen rushed to him. "Elias, what is it?" He was sweating, chest heaving. "Something's still here." Maureen's expression darkened. "You severed the entity. You destroyed the altar. There shouldn't be anything left." He looked up at her, eyes wide, terrified. "But I hear it. I feel it. And it's not the same voice. It's not the entity. It's something else." Maureen knelt beside him. "Tell me what it said." He shook his head slowly. "It didn't."
"Say anything. It showed me." "Showed you what?"
Elias looked back toward Hollowfield. The forest, full, alive, but not with people, not with birds or animals, with them. Faces I didn't recognize, but they were familiar. Wrong. He paused. "They looked like us." Maureen's voice trembled now. "Elias, what did you let in?" His breath caught, because in that moment he remembered something, not a clear memory, not an image, just a single feeling. Before Hollowfield was ever cursed and something else had been buried. Here, the pact had not sealed a malevolent deity into the land. It had locked something else out. And when he broke the pact, he opened the door. Elias stumbled to his feet. "We have to go." But as he turned to flee, he saw movement. In the distance, barely visible through the trees, figures, human-like, dozens, pale, with hollow eyes, standing perfectly still, watching. One took a step forward. Maureen gasped. "Elias! Those aren't spirits." He nodded slowly, dread sinking through him like...
"Frost, they're returning."
The figures in the distance didn't move at first. They stood like statues, unnaturally still, their forms blurred by the haze of the morning light. Elias could feel their presence, a weight pressing on his chest, the air thick with a sense of foreboding. They weren't quite human, yet they weren't entirely not human either. The longer he looked at them, the more their appearance seemed to shift, like half-formed memories struggling to take shape. "Elias," Maureen whispered, her voice trembling. "What are they? What's happening?" Elias could barely form words, his mind racing with fragmented thoughts and flashes of old memories. Stories he had heard long ago about the land before Hollowfield, before the curse. He had thought they were myths, folklore passed down from the town's earliest settlers, stories of the land's original inhabitants, but those stories were never meant to be believed. Now, as he stared at the figures, he understood. Maureen, he said, his voice tight. They're the ones who were here first. The ones who left Hollowfield behind. The ones who... Before he could finish, one of the figures moved, its limbs slow and deliberate, like something not quite alive. It stepped forward, its face hidden by a dark hood, its form tall and unnatural. The others followed suit, their movements in perfect unison, each step causing the ground to tremble faintly beneath Elias's feet. Maureen instinctively reached for Elias's arm, her grip firm as if trying to anchor him. Elias, they're coming closer. I know, he replied, the cold feeling of dread rising in his chest. He didn't want to move, didn't want to turn his back on them, because something deep inside told him that once he did, they would be upon him before he could blink. And yet standing there, staring at them, there was no choice but to face what they had become. They were the forgotten ones, the ones that Hollowfield had buried beneath layers of blood, sacrifice, and time. They had once inhabited this land, ancient beings who had made a pact with the first settlers, but the curse had sealed them away, kept them trapped in the spaces between worlds. And now, with the breaking of the pact, they were free, and their freedom would cost. What do we do? Maureen asked, fear clear in her voice. Elias's throat tightened. We run. Before he could turn to flee, a voice echoed through the air, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. You cannot outrun what you have released. The words cut through him like ice, seizing his body in place. The figures were no longer just moving. They were coming toward them, walking with an unnatural speed, the ground beneath them rippling as if the earth itself was reacting to their presence. Elias could hear them now, not just in the air, but in his mind, their thoughts, their hunger. We are the first, the forgotten, the ones who were sacrificed to build your town. Maureen looked at Elias, her eyes wide with terror. Elias, they want us. They want to take us. The figures were closer now, their hollow eyes gleaming in the low light, their faces twisted in expressions of longing and hunger. But Elias saw something else in their eyes, something ancient, something that spoke of pain, of betrayal. They're not just after us, Elias said, his voice strained. They're after the land, after Hollowfield. They want to take everything back. Maureen looked at him, confusion flickering in her gaze. But how? How are they going to do that? They've been bound to Hollowfield for centuries. Elias replied, stepping backward, his mind struggling to catch up with the revelation. The curse sealed them in. The land, the pact. It kept them away. But now that the balance has been shattered, they're free to take it all back. The land, the people, everything that was stolen from them. The figures were no longer just moving. They were now charging toward them, swift and silent, the ground beneath them trembling violently. The earth itself seemed to scream in protest, the force of their advance pushing against Elias's chest like an invisible wave. And then, from the mass of figures, one stepped forward, its form larger than the rest. The figure's hooded face lifted, revealing eyes that glowed with an eerie, unnatural light. There was no human warmth in them, only the cold emptiness of something long forgotten, something lost to time. You have broken the seal, the figure said, its voice a hollow echo in Elias's mind. And now, you must face the consequences. You have freed us, and now we will take what is ours. Elias felt his heart pound in his chest, his legs threatening to give way beneath him. The figure's words rang in his mind like a dark prophecy, and yet there was a part of him that couldn't deny it. The land had never truly been his to free. The pact had been broken, yes, but it had opened a door to something far worse. Something that had been buried beneath Hollowfield for as long as the town had stood. He glanced at Maureen, his thoughts a whirlwind. We need to get to the heart of the town. There's still something there, something we missed. Maureen didn't hesitate. Where? Elias motioned toward the center of the ruins. The altar, the place where everything began. If there's anything left to stop them, it's there. They turned and sprinted toward the remnants of the town center. But as they ran, Elias could feel the figures closing in on them. The air was thick with their presence, and the ground beneath them seemed to shift, pulling at their feet. The Forgotten Ones were gaining on them, their movements fast and unnaturally graceful, closing the distance with terrifying precision. Elias's heart raced. He couldn't outrun them, not in the state he was in, not with the weight of everything pressing down on him. And yet, he had no choice. He had to make it to the altar. The only thing that could save them was whatever lay hidden in the heart of the town. As they reached the center of the town, Elias felt a strange force pulling him toward the altar. The ruins around them seemed to shift, as if the land itself was reshaping, remaking itself to fit the return of the Forgotten. The figures were almost upon them now, their eyes burning with a hunger that made Elias's skin crawl. And then, in the distance, he saw it. The altar. But it wasn't the same. It had changed. The stone was darker now, its surface etched with new symbols. Symbols Elias didn't recognize. And at the center of the altar, there was a crack, an opening that pulsed with an eerie light. It's calling me, Elias thought, his body moving. Before his mind could catch up, the Forgotten Ones were upon them now, their voices a chorus of hunger and rage. And as Elias reached the altar, he knew that there was no turning back. The land was alive again, and it was about to take back what was rightfully its own. Elias's heart pounded as he reached the altar, the stone beneath his hands slick with an unnatural moisture. The figures were close now, too close, and he could feel the weight of their presence pressing down on him, like the very earth was suffocating him. Maureen was beside him, her breath shallow, her eyes darting around, searching for an escape that wasn't there. The Forgotten Ones had surrounded them, and there was no place left to run. He glanced at the altar, the crack in, its center now pulsating with an eerie light like the heartbeat of the land itself. The symbols etched into the stone had changed since the ritual. New markings, old but unfamiliar, pulsing with dark energy. Elias's skin prickled as he stared at them, something ancient and primal stirring within him. The land was awake again, and with it, something far darker. The figure that had stepped forward from the others, its hollow eyes fixed on Elias, raised a hand. "You freed us," it intoned, its voice like the sound of the earth cracking beneath the weight of time. "But you have not freed yourself." Elias felt a shiver run down his spine as he turned to face the figure. Its presence was overwhelming, like the very ground beneath him was alive with its power. The other Forgotten Ones stood motionless, as if awaiting some command. They were silent, but the air around them seemed to hum with an energy that made Elias's chest tighten. The land had returned to itself, and with it, the hunger of something that had been buried for centuries. "What do you want?" Elias asked, his voice hoarse but his resolve firm. The figure didn't answer immediately. It tilted its head, studying him, as though it were trying to understand him in the same way one might study a puzzle. "We were once the land," it said slowly, the words feeling like an ancient truth being revealed, something buried deep in the bones of the earth. "We were the soil, the roots, the trees. but the curse that bound us, it was not enough. It was not meant to trap us, only to keep us from returning. Elias's mind reeled, but he understood. The curse had never been to imprison these forgotten ones, these beings tied to the land. It had been to keep them from regaining their full power, from returning to themselves. The figure took another step forward, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. The curse kept us in shadow, it continued, but you have awakened. Us, you have broken the chains. Elias clenched his fists, realizing what was happening. I didn't mean to, I didn't know. You didn't know? The figure's voice hardened, the earth beneath Elias's feet rumbling as if it were a living, breathing thing. You think you have control over the land you freed? You think you freed us, but you only freed the hunger. You only freed what had been sealed for centuries. The land is ours, and now we will take what is ours. Elias's mind flashed to the altar, to the crack pulsing with that strange, ominous light. He felt it, the pull of the land that had always held him, tied him to Hollowfield, to the curse. Now, that pull was stronger than ever. No, Elias whispered, his breath coming in shallow gasps. You're wrong. You're not. The land, you're just its shadow. The figure's expression didn't change, but a terrible silence hung in the air. And then, with a force that made the very ground beneath them tremble, the figure raised its hand once more, and the land responded. The earth beneath them cracked open, fissures running through the ground like the opening of an ancient wound. The crack in the altar grew wider, the dark energy seeping out, flooding the air with a deep, primal force. Elias's vision blurred as the very earth seemed to come alive, its pulse quickening like it was breathing, consuming. The forgotten ones began to move, their hollow eyes fixed on the altar, and as they did, the ground shook violently. The altar, the land itself, was awakening. You freed us, the figure repeated, its voice now an unsettling mix of regret and rage. And now, you will become part of it. Elias staggered backward, his heart racing as he realized the full extent of the power he had unleashed. The land had not been freed, it had been reawakened, and with it, the forgotten ones were reclaiming. What was theirs? What had been stolen from them? The pact, the curse. It had never been about keeping them bound. It had been about holding them in check, keeping them from returning in their full power. And now, it was too late. Elias turned to Maureen, his eyes wide with panic. We need to stop this, we need to... But before he could finish, the earth trembled again, and a voice echoed in his mind, a voice that was not his own. It was the land itself speaking to him, claiming him. You are part of us. You always have been. The blood of your family runs through this land. You cannot undo what has been done. Elias fell to his knees, the weight of the land's power pressing down on him, its hunger seeping into his very soul. The figures were circling him now, their eyes glowing with an intensity that seemed to pierce through him, to unravel him. He could feel the land calling to him, its energy pulsing through his veins. No! Elias gasped, his mind screaming, I don't want this. The figure in front of him stepped closer, its face now clear, its hollow eyes filled with cold certainty. It is not your choice anymore. In that moment, Elias understood. He had been a part of Hollowfield all along. His blood, his family, had been tied to this land, tied to the curse, tied to the forgotten ones. And now, he was the key to the land's return. He had broken the seal, yes, but in doing so, he had made himself part of the land's awakening. And as the crack in the altar widened, as the forgotten ones closed in around him, Elias realized with sickening clarity that there was no escaping. The land was his inheritance, and it would claim him, body and soul. Elias's breath came in ragged gasps as the land pressed in around him, the energy from the altar and the Forgotten Ones filling the air with a suffocating weight. The ground trembled beneath him, and he felt the pulse of the earth itself running through his veins, a horrible, visceral connection that seemed to twist and tear at his very soul. The figures moved closer, their hollow eyes fixed on him, their presence consuming. The land, once quiet, once burdened by the curse, was now alive. Alive with hunger, with a desperate need to reclaim what had been lost. The Forgotten Ones had returned, and they had no intention of leaving. Elias stumbled backward, his mind racing. His heart pounded in his chest as the realization sank in. He hadn't just freed the land, he had reawakened it. The pact had never been about a simple curse. It had been about control. Control over something ancient, something that had existed before Hollowfield, before the town was built. The land was alive, and it had been waiting for its chance to return. The crack in the altar pulsed again, the energy pouring out in thick, dark tendrils. The Forgotten Ones circled him, their eyes glowing, and Elias felt the pressure of their collective gaze like an inescapable weight pushing him down. It was as though the land itself was reaching into him, tearing at the memories he had left, the very core of who he was. "You are part of us," the voice of the land echoed in his mind. "You have always been. You are bound to us, Elias. And now, you will become part of the earth, part of the hunger." "No," Elias screamed, his voice breaking, the pain in his chest intensifying. He reached for the altar, but it was too late. The land had already marked him, already claimed him in ways he couldn't understand. The curse was no longer just a force that controlled his bloodline. It was in him now. It was him. The figure in front of him, taller than the others, its presence dominating, stepped forward, its hand outstretched. "You freed us, Elias, and now we claim what is ours." Elias could feel the earth beneath him shift, a great pull in his chest, as if the land itself was trying to drag him into its depths. He could feel his mind fragmenting, his sense of self splitting apart like the crumbling stone of Hollowfield. His memories, his life, everything was slipping away, being torn from him by the very land he had once thought he could escape. The Forgotten Ones stood in a perfect circle around him, their faces no longer human, but twisted by the land's hunger. They were not just spirits. They were the land's ancient children, the ones who had been sacrificed to bind it. The curse had never been about protecting the land. It had been about containing it, keeping it from returning to its full strength. "You will be our anchor," the figure said, its voice cold and final. "The final part of the pact has been completed. You will carry the land's hunger. You will be part of us, and together we will reclaim all that was lost." Elias fell to his knees, his hands gripping the ground as the energy from the altar surged through him, a flood of power that tore at the very fabric of his being. He felt his body shake, his mind splintering as the land's ancient force pushed against him, demanding control. The Forgotten Ones began to chant, their voices low, like the murmuring of the earth itself. The sound filled Elias's ears, vibrating through his skull. The ground seemed to shift beneath him, and he felt as though the earth was swallowing him whole, pulling him down into the depths where there was nothing but darkness and hunger. "You cannot escape," the land's voice whispered, its cold tendrils wrapping around him like chains. "You are part of us. You always have been. Your blood is ours." Elias gasped, his body racked with pain, but he fought to hold on. He could feel his memories slipping away, his past fading into the void. Jonah, his family, Hollowfield, all of it was becoming a blur, a fading shadow of something once real. His identity, his sense of self was slipping through his fingers like sand in the wind, and yet, through the haze of darkness, a single thought emerged. I cannot let this happen. With every ounce of strength he had left, Elias reached deep inside himself. He felt for that thread of resistance, the last remnant of his will, the part of him that was still human. That was still Elias. I refuse, he whispered, his voice breaking but steady. I refuse to become this. The ground beneath him cracked, and for a moment, everything stopped. The figures around him froze, their faces a mixture of confusion and fury. The earth trembled once more, but this time it was different. Elias could feel something shifting, something within him pushing back against the land's power. The altar pulsed again, its light flickering, and for a moment Elias felt a surge of clarity, of purpose. He understood now. The land had been bound by the pact, yes, but the land had also been waiting for someone to choose, someone to step forward and claim it. And in that moment, Elias realized that he didn't have to be its anchor. He didn't have to carry its hunger. He could break the land's grip. He could choose to be free. With a surge of defiance, Elias slammed his hand onto the altar. The crack in the stone widened, and the dark energy erupted, surging into the air in a wave of pure, raw power. The Forgotten Ones screamed, their forms writhing as the land itself recoiled from the force Elias had unleashed. And then, with a final deafening crack, the land broke. The earth beneath him shattered, the figures of the Forgotten Ones disintegrating into nothingness, their cries fading into the void. The altar crumbled, and with it, the land's ancient hunger was silenced. Elias collapsed, the weight of the power lifting from his body, the echo of the land's pull fading into the distance. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he thought he might lose consciousness. But then a strange calm washed over him. The world around him was still, silent. Hollowfield, the curse, the hunger, it was all gone. The land, the Forgotten Ones, had been severed from him, from everything. And yet, as Elias lay there, gasping for breath, he realized something else. His memories, the ones that had slipped away, were not gone. They were there, locked away, but not erased. They had been buried beneath the weight of the land's power, but they weren't lost, not forever. He had broken the cycle. He had freed the land. He had freed himself. But there was one final truth that he couldn't deny. He had chosen to be free. The earth beneath Elias was still. The hum of the land's ancient hunger had receded, leaving only silence behind. A heavy, suffocating quiet that seemed to echo through the ruins of Hollowfield. The altar was nothing more than a pile of crumbled stone now, the symbols that had once pulsed with dark energy reduced to dust. The figures of the Forgotten Ones had disintegrated into nothingness, their presence faded like a bad dream. Elias lay on the ground, his chest heaving as he tried to steady his breath. The world around him felt different, lighter, but in a way that was unsettling. Hollowfield was no longer a place of curses, of blood and sacrifice. The land, once alive with ancient power, was now still, its energy spent, its hunger quenched. But in the stillness, there was also a sense of emptiness, a void where something had been but was now gone. He rose slowly, his body aching, as though the very act of standing was an effort. The weight of the power he had just wielded, of the land he had severed himself from, still clung to him like a shadow. But something else had shifted inside him. He had broken the cycle, severed the land's grip, and in doing so, he had freed himself. But it wasn't just freedom. It was rebirth, a new beginning. Elias took a tentative step forward, his eyes scanning the barren landscape. Hollowfield, The town that had once been a prison for him and his family was now nothing more than a collection of ruins, the remnants of a dark past buried beneath the rubble. There was no longer a curse, no more ancient hunger to hold him here. He was free, but the question remained, what would he do with that freedom? He turned back to Maureen, who had remained standing at the edge of the town square, her posture stiff but resolute. Her gaze was fixed on the horizon, but there was something softer in her eyes now, as though the weight of what they had done had finally settled into her bones. "I didn't think it would be like this," Elias said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I'd feel different, like I'd finally be different." Maureen turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "You are different, Elias. We both are. The land no longer holds us. We're not bound to it anymore." Elias nodded slowly, but the uncertainty still lingered within him, gnawing at the edges of his thoughts. He had freed Hollowfield. He had freed Jonah's soul. But now that the dust had settled, what was left? He had lost so much of his past, so many of the memories that had once defined him. Would he ever feel whole again? "I don't know who I am without it," Elias admitted, his voice thick with the weight of his confession. Maureen walked toward him, her steps slow but sure. "You are you, Elias, and that's enough." Elias looked down at his hands, the same hands that had torn through the earth, that had broken the chains that had bound his family for so long. They were trembling, but not from fear, not anymore. The tremors were from the release, the sudden, overwhelming freedom that came with having no more chains to carry. "I don't know if I'll ever be the same," Elias said, his voice quiet. "I don't know if I'll ever fully remember." Maureen placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip warm and steady. "You don't need to remember it all, Elias. The land, the curse, it kept you trapped in the past. It kept you from seeing what was in front of you, what could be. You're free now, and that's enough." The words settled in his chest, a quiet comfort that felt like the first breath of air after being submerged underwater. He was free. He was no longer bound to the curse, no longer tied to the land that had stolen so much from him. The past would never be fully recovered. But the future was still there, waiting. Elias glanced around at the ruins of Hollowfield. The town was a testament to the past, the sacrifices, the pain, the blood that had been spilled to keep the land alive. But now, it was just an empty shell, and in that emptiness, he saw something else. A new beginning. "We can rebuild," Elias said quietly, the thought settling into his heart. "We can start over. It's not too late." Maureen smiled, though it was a smile tinged with sorrow. "It never is, Elias, as long as we're still standing." Together, they turned away from the ruins of Hollowfield, the once foreboding town now behind them. The forest ahead seemed different, not the dark, twisted woods that had once kept them locked in a nightmare, but a wild, untamed space that beckoned with the possibility of something new, something they could shape, something they could build. They didn't know where the road ahead would lead. There was no map, no guide. But for the first time, Elias didn't feel the crushing weight of the past on his shoulders. He didn't feel the pull of the land, the hunger that had once kept him bound to Hollowfield. Ahead of him lay nothing but open ground. And for the first time, Elias felt the stirring of something like hope. "You ready?" Maureen asked, her voice light, though her eyes were filled with the weight of everything they had been through. Elias took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill his lungs. The past was gone. The land was gone. Hollowfield was gone. "Ready," he said, his voice firm with resolve, and together they walked into the unknown. The road ahead stretched into the horizon, a ribbon of dirt cutting through the vast wilderness. The trees around them seemed to grow taller, the green of new growth pushing through the soil like a fresh breath after years of silence. As Elias and Maureen walked side by side, their footsteps soft against the earth, the world seemed to sigh with relief, as though it had been holding its breath for centuries, waiting for this moment of release. They had left Hollowfield behind, but its shadow still loomed over them. Even now, Elias could feel the weight of its history pressing on his chest. The town that had been a prison for so long, its name tied to sacrifice and blood, now existed only in the echoes of their memories. Hollowfield had been reduced to dust, its curse broken, its land freed, but the scars of what had been lived on etched into their very beings. The past wasn't something that could be erased, but they had walked away from it. And that, for now, was enough. As the days passed, the world around them seemed to heal. The land that had once been shackled by the curse slowly began to come back to life. The trees thickened, flowers bloomed where there had been only decay. The sound of birds returned, filling the air with the vibrant noise of life. Hollowfield had been erased, but in its place the land was being reborn. They made camp beneath the shelter of a tall oak tree one evening, its branches spreading wide like protective arms. The fire crackled softly, casting a warm glow on their faces as they sat in silence. The days had been long, the journey difficult, but every step forward had felt like a victory. They were no longer bound by the weight of the past. The world, for the first time in Elias's life, felt open. "I still can't get used to it," Maureen said, breaking the silence as she stared into the flames. The quiet, the peace. Elias nodded, staring into the fire. "It's strange, isn't it? I thought when it was over, when the curse was broken, I thought there'd be some kind of relief, some moment of clarity, but instead it feels like, I don't know, like we're floating." Maureen smiled faintly. "That's because you're not carrying the weight of the curse anymore. You're not carrying Hollowfield's ghost." Elias glanced at her, his face a mixture of uncertainty and reflection. "But I still feel it, the emptiness. I thought I'd be free, and I am, I know that. But what happens now? We've left Hollowfield behind, but I still don't know who I am without it." Maureen's eyes softened, her gaze lingering on the horizon, where the setting sun painted the sky in hues of purple and orange. "You're still you, Elias. The curse didn't define you." "Hollowfield didn't define you. You get to decide who you are now." Elias remained silent for a moment, letting her words sink in. He could still feel the pull of the past, the weight of everything he had lost. His memories of Jonah, his brother, who had been lost to the land, still felt like a distant echo. The love, the pain, the grief, they were all fragments scattered in the wind, as if they never belonged to him in the first place. But as he sat there, listening to the crackle of the fire, a thought crossed his mind. Maybe that was the point. The past would always be a part of him, but it didn't have to be what defined him. The land, the curse, Hollowfield, they were all stories of the past, and now it was time to write a new one. "I don't know what comes next," Elias said, finally speaking the truth he had been avoiding. "But I'm going to try. I'm going to find my way forward." Maureen gave a small nod, her expression one of quiet understanding. We all have to start somewhere, and wherever that is, we're free to build it together. The wind shifted, rustling the leaves above them, and for the first time since the land had awakened, Elias felt something stirring deep within him. It wasn't the hunger of the earth. It wasn't the curse that had once bound him. It was something else, something quiet, something hopeful. He looked at Maureen, his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. "Together," he echoed. a sense of peace settling into his bones. The world was changing, and so was he. Hollowfield was behind them, but in its place there was the possibility of something new, something unmarked by the past, untouched by the shadow of the curse, something that could grow, slowly, surely, into something better. The fire crackled again, sending up a brief flash of sparks into the cool night air. And as the sky darkened, above them Elias allowed himself to relax. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while he didn't fear it. The land was free, the curse was broken, and now so was he. The days turned to weeks as Elias and Maureen traveled farther from the ruins of Hollowfield. The landscape changed gradually, from the barren stretch of land that had been hollowed out by the curse to a softer, more fertile land, where life seemed to be blooming again. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers, and the trees began to grow thick with green, as though nature itself was remembering how to thrive after so many years of neglect. Yet, for all the beauty around him, Elias felt a nagging sense of unease. He had spent so much time running from the curse, from the land that had claimed his family's legacy. But as he walked through this renewed world, it felt as though the echo of Hollowfield still clung to him, haunting him in quiet, unexpected ways. The land was free now, yes. But had he truly broken the cycle? Or had he merely freed it to find another way of claiming him? Maureen noticed the way Elias would pause, as if listening for something just beyond his reach. The distant echoes of voices, perhaps, or the whisper of a memory too faint to hold on to. She hadn't said anything, not wanting to bring up the weight that still hung between them, but it was clear to her that the peace Elias sought was still out of reach. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the forest, Maureen found Elias standing alone by a small stream, staring into the water. His face was still, but there was something in his eyes, a deep sorrow, as if he were waiting for something, or someone, that would never come. She approached him quietly, standing a few feet away at first, unsure of what to say. The weight of the silence stretched between them, but Elias was the first to speak. "I hear it sometimes," he said, his voice distant. "The sound of Hollowfield, the people, the voices of the ones who were lost to it." Maureen's heart tightened. She stepped closer to him, her presence grounding him in a way that only she could. "Elias, the land is free now. The curse is gone. The echoes of the past, they're just that, the past. You've broken the cycle." Elias shook his head, his eyes fixed on the flowing water. "I don't think I've broken anything. I thought, if I ran far enough, if I got away from the land, I would leave it behind. But now I hear the voices, and it's like they're still calling me, telling me I'm not really free." Maureen's voice softened, her hand reaching out to gently touch his arm. "You are free. You've set them free. Hollowfield is no longer a prison, Elias. It's just a memory now, like a dream that fades with the morning light." Elias closed his eyes, letting her words wash over him. But even as they did, he felt the pull of something deep within him, in the very marrow of his bones. It was the land's memory, the part of him that had always been tied to it, bound by blood, by ancestral pact. He had broken the curse, yes, but he had never fully understood what it meant to sever that connection. "I thought I could forget," Elias said softly. "I thought I could start over. But every time I think I've left it behind, I feel the weight of it. The land, the blood, my family, the pact. It's all still with me." Maureen's eyes softened with understanding. She had seen the change in him, the gradual loss of the memories, the struggle to find himself in a world that felt alien after Hollowfield had collapsed. She had been there when they first walked away from the ruins, thinking they had outrun the past. But like him, she too felt the ripple of something that hadn't been fully severed. "The land doesn't just take," Maureen said, her voice steady. "It gives too. Everything you've lost, every memory that's slipping away. It's because the land fed on it. It took the best parts of you, the ones tied to your bloodline. But it didn't take all of you, Elias. The part that chooses to be free, to rebuild, that's still yours. And that's where the future lies." Elias looked at her, his eyes searching as if looking for an answer in her face, some key to unlock the emptiness that lingered inside him. For a long time, he hadn't known who he was without the curse, without the land's weight. But in Maureen's gaze, he saw something else, a reflection of himself, a glimpse of the man he had been and could still become. "I thought I had to leave everything behind to be free," Elias whispered, his voice trembling. "But maybe freedom isn't about forgetting. Maybe it's about accepting what was and choosing to build something new from it." Maureen smiled gently, a quiet warmth in her expression. "Exactly. It's about remembering that you can choose. You don't have to carry the land's burden anymore. You can decide what part of your past stays with you and what part you leave behind." Elias stood in the quiet, the weight of her words settling into him like the first drop of rain after a long drought. For so long, he had thought that freedom meant erasing the past, running from the land that had once enslaved him. But now he saw the truth, that the land's power had never truly been in its hunger. It had always been in its ability to make people forget who they were, to erase their choices and their will. The land no longer held him, but in learning how to live without it, he would have to embrace the memories, the good and the bad, that made him who he was. That was the key to true freedom. The land had shaped him, but it didn't define him. "Maybe it's time to start over," Elias said, his voice stronger now, his resolve solidifying. "But not by forgetting, by remembering." Maureen nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "And with that, you'll finally be free." Elias took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace settle within him, like the final gust of wind clearing away the last of the fog. He could still hear the echoes of Hollowfield, but now they felt distant, like the remnants of a dream he could no longer hold on to. The land had once bound him, but now it was the choices he made that would shape the man he would become. As the moon rose high above the clearing, casting its pale light over the water, Elias stood tall, no longer haunted by the past, but strengthened by it. The land was free, he was free, and in that freedom he could finally begin again. The moonlight bathed the forest in a soft, silvery glow, casting long shadows across the wild, untamed land. It was a night of quiet promise, the air thick with the potential of what could be. The journey Elias and Maureen had taken was far from over, but in the stillness of the evening, there was a sense of purpose growing between them, something born from the ashes of Hollowfield, something that had been given the chance to grow, free from the weight of the past. They sat together by the fire, the warmth of the flames flickering in the cool night. The crackling of the wood was a soothing sound, its dance of light a quiet companion in the stillness of the wilderness. But as Elias stared into the fire, his thoughts were far from peaceful. The past had not been erased, nor had it been forgotten. He could still feel the echoes of Hollowfield, the memories of his family, the ghosts of the curse that had shaped his life for so long. But those memories were no longer chains. They had become part of the soil he now stood upon, roots beneath, the surface of who he was. Maureen, sensing his unrest, spoke softly, her voice cutting through the tension that hung in the air. "What do you think comes next, Elias? What happens now that Hollowfield is gone? Elias exhaled slowly, his gaze still fixed on the flames. I don't know. I think we've both been running from something for so long. From the land, from the curse from our pasts. But now it feels like we're being asked to build something new, something different. Maureen nodded, her expression thoughtful. We've already built something, haven't we? We're free. Elias looked at her, his eyes tired but clear. We are free. But I think freedom means more than just escaping the past. It's about choosing what we make of the future. We've been given the chance to decide, and I think that's the hardest part. There's nothing guiding us anymore. No curse, no town. We're free to choose who we are and what we become. The weight of his words hung between them, and Maureen said nothing at first. Instead, she reached for the small pouch that hung. From her belt and from it, she pulled out an old, worn book, the same book that had been with her since they left Hollowfield. She opened it slowly, the pages yellowed and cracked with age, but still intact. She had never spoken much of the book, but Elias knew it contained the knowledge of her ancestors, wisdom that had once been used to bind the land, and now, perhaps, could be used to guide them forward. Elias's curiosity stirred. What is it, Maureen? She opened to a page that was nearly worn out, the ink barely legible. This book. It's the history of my family, the ones who were tied to the land. Long before your family's curse took root, it's about the original pact, the one that bound us all to this land. And it's about the forgotten ones, the people who lived here before any of us. Elias leaned forward, his interest piqued. The forgotten ones? Maureen nodded. They were the land's original inhabitants, the ones who lived in harmony with it. But over time, they were replaced, forgotten by those who came after, who made the pact and trapped them. The curse was never just about keeping the land contained. It was about controlling the memory of what came before, what was buried beneath Hollowfield's soil. Elias felt a chill run down his spine as the weight of her words settled into him. The pact had been about more than just blood and sacrifice. It had been about erasing the land's true history, the people who had first tended it. Hollowfield had been built on lies, on the erasure of the very land it had been built upon. So, what does this mean for us now? Elias asked quietly. Maureen closed the book, her eyes meeting his with quiet resolve. It means that the land's history isn't just behind us. It's part of us. The forgotten ones are still here, beneath the soil, in the air, in the trees. They're not gone, Elias. They've always been a part of this place. And now, we have a choice. Elias's mind raced as he considered her words. The forgotten ones, the original inhabitants of the land, were not just spirits. They were part of the very fabric of the earth. And now that the land had been freed, they were no longer bound by the pact. They were waiting for someone to remember them, waiting for someone to choose them. We can't just rebuild the town, Elias murmured. Not on the same ground, not the way it was before. Maureen shook her head, a small, sad smile on her lips. No, the land has to be reborn. We can't erase the past, Elias, but we can learn from it. We can honor the forgotten ones. We can build something new, something better. The land doesn't belong to the past anymore. It belongs to us now, and with that power, we can choose how to live with it. Elias stared at the book in her hands, at the fragile history that had survived so long. And for the first time since they had left Hollowfield, he felt something stir inside him. A sense of purpose. A direction that wasn't just about survival, but about creating something of value from the ruins of the past. He stood up, his eyes scanning the horizon, the land before them stretching wide and untamed. We can plant the seeds of something new, Maureen. We can create a new covenant, one that doesn't feed on sacrifice, one that honors the land, the people who were lost, and the future we're about to build. Maureen stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the distant trees. A new covenant, she repeated softly, one that remembers, one that learns. Elias nodded, the weight of the decision settling into his chest. The forgotten ones won't be forgotten anymore. We'll make sure of that. Together, they turned toward the distant horizon, the first light of dawn casting its golden rays across the land. Hollowfield was gone. The curse was broken. And now a new beginning awaited. One not shaped by blood or sacrifice, but by choice. And in that choice, the land could finally begin to heal. The morning sun bathed the land in its soft golden light, and Elias stood at the edge of the clearing, watching as the first rays of daylight kissed the soil that had once been cursed. He could feel the pulse of life beneath him, subtle, yet undeniable, like a heartbeat that had long been silenced, but was now slowly coming back to life. The land was healing, the curse broken, the forgotten ones honored, and the earth itself seemed to stir with the promise of something new. Maureen stood beside him, her expression thoughtful as she looked out across the land. This is where it starts, Elias. A new beginning. Elias nodded, though the weight of his thoughts still lingered. He had spent so long running from the past, from the legacy of Hollowfield and the curse that had bound him. But now, in this quiet moment, as he felt the land waking beneath his feet, he understood something deeper. The land was not a place to be escaped from. It was a place to be cared for, respected, and nurtured. In freeing it from the chains of the past, he had also freed himself from guilt, from fear, from the weight of a legacy that was no longer his to carry. It's not just about us, Elias said quietly, his voice filled with a quiet resolve. It's about the land too. We're not just building something new for us. We're building it for the land. For everything that's come before. For the ones who were lost. Maureen turned to him, her eyes filled with understanding. Exactly. The land has always been a part of us. We can't forget that. Elias took a deep breath, his eyes sweeping over the land that stretched out before them. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was theirs to forge. They had broken the curse, but now it was time to plant the seeds of something new, something that didn't carry the weight of sacrifice, something that didn't require a blood price to survive. They had talked about rebuilding, but it wasn't just about recreating what Hollowfield had been. It was about creating a new community, one that respected the land, honored the past without being bound to it, and built something sustainable and kind. It was about healing, not just the land, but themselves, and everyone who had been touched by the curse. I think we need to start small, Maureen said, breaking the silence, planting new roots, not just literally, but symbolically. We build a community, we tend to the earth to each other, and we do it with respect. Elias's gaze drifted toward the trees in the distance, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. Respect. That's what Hollowfield never had. The land was always treated as something to be conquered, to be used, to be fed upon. Maureen's eyes softened. We were all part of that, Elias. Our families, the curse, it all fed the land in one way or another. But now we choose something different. Elias smiled faintly, though there was sadness in his eyes. He had been part of the land's hunger, and now he would be part of its healing. It was a long road, one filled with the echoes of those lost, of the mistakes that had been made. But there was a deep sense of peace settling within him, a sense that finally he was where he needed to be. I'm ready to start, he said softly, but we need others. We can't do this alone. Maureen nodded. We won't be. The land will attract those who are ready to rebuild with us. Those who Believe in what we're doing in this new way of living. The land will remember Elias. It will remember us. The thought settled in Elias's heart. A seed planted deep within. They had already begun. Their journey was not just about leaving Hollowfield behind, but about returning to it in a new form, one that honored the past but was not consumed by it. And in that return, there was hope. The first step would be to build, to sow the seeds of a new covenant, one that wasn't about ownership or sacrifice, but about symbiosis. Elias could see it now in his mind's eye. The community that would rise from the ashes, one where the land and the people worked together, where each was given what they needed in exchange for care and respect. We'll need to gather resources, Maureen said as though reading his thoughts. Find those who have left, those who have escaped. Let them know we've broken the curse. Let them know we're starting something new. Elias nodded, his heart swelling with purpose. We'll find them, and we'll build a place where they can feel safe, where they can trust the land again. The weight of Hollowfield's legacy still lingered between them, but it no longer
Felt like a burden. It felt like a foundation, a place from which to grow.
and with each step forward, Elias could feel the soil beneath him becoming richer, more alive. The sun was setting now, casting the land in a warm golden hue. The light shimmered across the trees, turning the leaves into gold. It was a new day. Day of beginning. We'll start here, Elias said quietly, turning to face Maureen. And we'll keep going until we've built something worthy of this land. Maureen smiled. And we'll do it together. The land was no longer a place of sacrifice. It was a place of possibility. The curse had been broken. The forgotten ones had been honored. And now the real work began. The seeds of a new beginning had been planted, and in time, they would grow. The seasons changed as they always did, marking the passage of time in ways both subtle and profound. Spring bloomed into summer, and the land that had once been desolate, broken, and consumed by the curse now began to flourish with new life. The once barren soil had turned fertile, teeming with the green of growth, and the trees that had stood witness to centuries of sorrow now whispered a new tale, one of hope, of healing. Elias stood at the edge of the small settlement they had begun to build. It was modest at first, just a handful of huts, a few tools, and the shared determination of a few brave souls who had believed in the vision he and Maureen had set into motion. But as the months passed, the settlement grew. The land was healing, and with it the people who had come, those who had been scattered by fear, by grief, by the hunger of the land, were beginning to find peace. Together, they had created something new, a place that honored the past but wasn't defined by it, a place of new beginnings. Elias looked out over the fields, where the crops they had planted in the spring were now ripe for harvest. The sight was a quiet testament to everything they had fought for. In the distance, Maureen was working with a group of settlers, teaching them how to weave the new growth of the land into something sustainable. The children ran between the rows of crops, laughing, playing, their joy echoing in the air like a song of the future. Elias had found his place among them. No longer burdened by the weight of Hollowfield, he had learned to trust in the land once more. He had come to understand that the true power of the earth was not in its ability to give, but in its capacity to receive, to nurture. They had given the land respect, and in return, it had given them abundance. This was not a place of hunger, of sacrifice. It was a place of balance. Elias. He turned to find Maureen standing behind him, her face soft with the glow of the afternoon sun. Her hair was wild with the wind, her hands stained from the day's work, but her eyes were filled with a deep contentment. He smiled at her, the Lines of worry that had once marred his face now softened, replaced by something that felt like peace. "It's coming together, isn't it?" he said quietly, motioning toward the fields. Maureen nodded, her gaze following his. "It is. But this isn't just about the land. It's about what we've built here, about how we've changed, about who we've become together." Elias felt the truth of her words settle deep within him. They had become more than survivors. They had become builders, not just of homes, of crops, of shelter, but of a new way of living. The past had been their foundation, but it had been the choices they made in the present that had given them the strength to move forward. "You know, I never thought it would feel like this," Elias said, his voice thick with emotion. "I always thought I was running toward something, toward freedom. But I didn't realize that true freedom wasn't just about leaving the past behind. It was about accepting it, about choosing to be here in this moment." Maureen stepped closer, her hand brushing his arm, a quiet comfort in the midst of everything they had built. "And now we're here, Elias. This moment is ours, and the future. It's not about what we've lost. It's about what we're creating, together." Elias turned toward her, his eyes meeting hers, and for the first time since the day he had left Hollowfield behind, he felt truly, wholly free. The land had been a prison, yes, but it had also been a teacher, and in the years that followed, it would continue to teach him, teach all of them, the value of patience, of growth, of balance. They had learned that the earth could be a home, not just a place of taking, but of giving. "I think," Elias said slowly, "that we've just begun." Maureen smiled, her eyes bright with the promise of what was yet to come. "Yes, Elias, we have." The sound of footsteps on the dirt path interrupted their quiet moment, and they both turned to see a young boy running toward them, a smile lighting up his face. He stopped in front of Elias, holding out a small bundle of bright flowers. "Look, Elias, we found more wildflowers by the stream." Elias crouched down to the boy's level, smiling at the simple gift. The boy's eyes were wide with the excitement of discovery, his hands trembling slightly as he held the flowers out toward Elias. "These are beautiful," Elias said softly, reaching out to take the bundle. He inhaled the sweet scent of the flowers, and for a moment he closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun on his skin, the earth beneath his feet, the promise of the future growing around him. The boy's voice broke through his thoughts. "We're going to plant them," the boy exclaimed. "We'll make a garden, just like you said." Elias smiled, standing up and ruffling the boy's hair. "That's the spirit, and one day you'll show your children how to do the same." As the boy ran off toward the others, Elias turned back to Maureen, his heart full. It wasn't just about the crops. It wasn't just about rebuilding Hollowfield. It was about planting seeds, not just in the soil, but in the hearts of those who would come after them. They had created something that would last, something that would grow. "We've made something that matters," Elias whispered, more to himself than to Maureen. "Yes," she agreed, her voice soft but firm. "And it will grow, just like the land." As the sun sank lower in the sky, painting the world in deep shades of orange and purple, Elias stood side by side with Maureen, feeling the weight of the past finally lift. They had broken the curse. They had set the land free. And now, with each passing day, they would build a future rooted in the very soil that had once imprisoned them. A future that would carry the lessons of the past, but would not be defined by them. And in that, they had found true freedom. The harvest was just beginning.